According to the villagers, this forest is full of ghosts. His movements were constrained. Each breath felt like his last. After taking a few more steps, the traveler fell heavily to his knees. His palms pressed into the cold ground. A quiet groan seeped through his clenched teeth. It seemed as if all the suffering that had been accumulating in his soul had merged into this sound. It's quiet until your ears ring. The day runs away quickly. Timidly hiding in the dense thicket, the evening floods the earth with darkness. And now, the trees, twisted by radiation, acquire strange, frightening outlines. The darkness transforms the world, turning the ordinary into the unfamiliar. Everything around seems alien and hostile.
You need to rest a little. Just a few minutes, and then forward again, to the intended goal. After all, there is still time.
In the direction where the gloomy clouds are crawling, driven by the north wind. There, where salvation lies, the man threw back his head, exposing his open face to the cool of the evening. His lips moved silently. Somewhere to the side, a dry tree that had lived out its days groaned. The leaves trembled, and the world, falling asleep again, was enveloped in silence. Memories swirl like autumn leaves. They cause only pain. Oh, if only I could go back in time for a moment, fix everything. But no, I can't erase those terrible moments from my memory. A trembling picture, as if in a sultry haze, distant shots, more blood, more death. Is it fair to find in order to lose again? The low sky darkens, the tree trunks multiply before the eyes, lined up in a row along the path. The evening twilight lying in the undergrowth trembles, folds into bizarre figures. It seems that they are approaching, slowly, floating in the darkness toward the man, closer and closer. The ghosts are here again. They surround the traveler, stretching out their hands, trying to lift him up. They will be there until the end. Once a man gave them hope, and now the ghosts have come to thank him. Let's go, they whisper, touching the man's hands. It seems that the ghosts are alive, they have flesh, they want to help. A single tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek from the corner of his eye. Brushing it away, the traveler rose heavily to his feet. The fatigue had receded a little, and the man felt a little better. He looked up at the darkening sky, from where the first stars winked at him. Dusk was falling. Chapter 1. When Hope Dies. Step. One more. What lies ahead? The trees press against the road, stretching their gnarled branches towards the stalkers. The thickets along the roadsides, like an uncooperative prisoner, maintain a sullen silence. Sometimes the persistent desire to shoot overcomes you, to split the frozen silence, to loosen the tension of the string's nerves. The young stalker shook his head, driving away the obsession, noisily inhaled the cool air. His palm squeezed the fore end of the machine gun tighter. A strange feeling. The morning is quiet. The way back is without adventures. And yet anxiety stubbornly creeps into his soul. And there is only one desire: to get to his native station as soon as possible. Nearby, an army Ural roared with effort, throwing clouds of exhaust fumes into the morning air. The bulky vehicle, loaded with captured goods, slowly crawled ahead. The escort fighters, dispersed along the entire column, carefully watched the deserted street. The second tractor with prisoners dragged itself at the tail of the formation. Having gathered a rich harvest, the detachment was returning home. The early morning greeted people with coolness. The night rain washed the streets, moistening the dry wounds of roads and multi-story buildings, pressing the dust to the ground. Mourned by the rain, dead Nizhny Novgorod looked a little fresher. The asphalt gleamed damply, the The water in the puddles on the road trembled, barely noticeably. A fresh breeze stirred the branches of the gnarled trees. Looking at the truck with the prisoners, the young stalker squinted with displeasure. Women with children and captured farmers. These should have been driven on foot so that they would cheer up, but they were given such a motorcade. They travel in all comforts, the devils. Isn't that too much honor? But you can't dispute the commandant's order, and you can't leave them at the new stronghold. So they dragged them along. The guy looked around the squad. A feeling of vague anxiety hung in his soul, like a stone around the neck of a drowned man. What kind of misfortune is this? It seems like a persistent gaze is boring into your back, but when you turn around, there is no one. The leaves are slightly swaying. Darkness is looking out of the windows of the houses on the right side of the road. Peace and quiet, and God's grace, but his soul is restless. The commander strides briskly ahead. The senior is always in uniform. That's why he is a commander, so that his will hovers over the detachment, so that he can set an example. Commanders are forged from iron and tempered in icy water. So is this one, a steel character, a tempered will, a real warrior. Fighting, seasoned, with such a one even in the thick of things. It's not scary. The stalkers stomp briskly, each in his place. The senior fighter also placed the fighters wisely, like pieces on a chessboard. He left the group at the back to cover the rear, and stuck the sharp-eyed guys on the sides to keep bushes and windows under fire. And he himself is in front, plotting the course and monitoring the situation. Everything is clear and coordinated. Everything is as it should be. The squad passed a small gas station. The shop next to it grinned with broken windows and rotten cars huddled under the sagging roof. To the left of the road stretched a fence, behind which the thickets were rampant. There, hidden behind the thicket of trees and bushes, was the building of the Nizhny Novgorod State University. The young stalker remembered how he used to visit here with his older comrades. There was a time when people went to university for knowledge, not for bribes. Weaving between the rotten cars, like a boat in a winding riverbed, the squad confidently moved on. Ahead loomed an overpass, hanging over the road like a bridge over a riverbed. A pigeon rose from a puddle near a slanted bus stop, sat on a lamppost near a broken kiosk, watching the squad, and then began to coo, hoarsely, unpleasantly. The commander looked at him unkindly and waved his hand. Taking off from the lamppost, the bird disappeared behind the trees. What a healthy one! There weren't any like them before. They grow bigger every year, and any minute now they'll start attacking like crows, the stalker thought, watching the bird. He slowed down a bit, listened to his feelings. A vague anxiety was gnawing at him, giving him no peace. It was stuck inside, like a rusty nail. You can't pull it out. The commander stops. His ears catch the sounds of the surrounding world. Silence. The damned deceiver lulls vigilance, seems familiar and cozy. But trusting her is the last thing in the work of a stalker. She can betray at the most inopportune moment. Ah, the commander is listening for a long time. Has he sensed danger? The stalker pointed the barrel of his machine gun towards the bushes and turned his head. The safety catch clicked quietly. It seemed like something gray and nimble flashed in the bushes. It's about to start. To the gun! Boomed a loud bass voice from ahead. The stalker quickly turned. The machine gun flew into a combat position. The thickets shook, and breaking branches, nimble gray creatures rushed from the trees onto the asphalt. The quiet morning exploded with the cries of predators and gunfire. The monkey-like creatures rushed at the people swiftly, leaving no time for reflection. The guy pressed the trigger, and a short burst mowed down the first fastest predator. The creature spread out on the sidewalk, and its long claws scraped the asphalt disgustingly. The stalker looked around, searching for another victim. "Lyaka, on the left!" someone yelled nearby. The fighter turned half around, raising his weapon. The predators were pressing hard from the left flank. A serious fight was starting there. The creatures attacked unexpectedly, threatening to break through the defense. And suddenly the guy noticed a lonely figure to the side, instantly recognizing it as a brave man from the newly minted Stalkers. What a stupid fool. He had so many fights that he could count them on his fingers. And he was climbing into hell ahead of his father. The youngster fired in short bursts, picking off the predators one after another from the pack. In the heat of battle, he apparently forgot all about caution. Finally, when the firing pin clicked empty, the young hero came to his senses. He threw back the empty magazine, briskly shoved a new one into the slot, preparing to repel the enemy. Something went wrong. Having shot another creature, the guy noticed a young man out of the corner of his eye. The fighter was pulling the jammed bolt, looking with horror at the attacking predators. "Ah, you fucking hero!" the stalker cursed, rushing to help the young man. Every second counted. His comrade couldn't keep up. He fiddled with the bolt, trying to eject the stuck cartridge, but in vain. The fighter threw away the machine gun that had betrayed him and began to pull the Makarov out of its holster. He still managed to fire a few more times, and then a living wave of creatures rushed at him. The scream of the dying man was drowned out by the noise of the battle. The creatures tried to break through, but the dense fire pushed them back again. By pushing back the predators, the fighters patched up the breach in the defense, and now they felt more confident. The guy glanced again at where his comrade had just fallen. There, the beasts were tearing apart what was left of the slow-witted fighter. Gritting his teeth, the stalker fired a burst into a pile of mutants. Bullets pounded the bus stop and the wall of the kiosk, chopping off tree branches, shredding leaves. Glass clinked, one of the predators squealed, and in the hustle and bustle of the battle, no one noticed how a small figure slipped out of the back of the truck and darted towards the saving alley. What you can't see on a foggy morning. A white haze floated lazily over the water, so thick that the distant shore of the lake was barely discernible behind it. Like jelly, the fog spread along the overgrown park paths, approaching the highway and brick multi-story buildings. Here and there, bushes and low trees stuck out like islands, and not a soul around. A familiar morning picture. But then, right at the water's edge, there was movement. A dark silhouette moved cautiously, as if not wanting to give itself away. Whoever it was, despite the early morning, it was behaving extremely quietly and cautiously. Arkady listened again, holding his breath. Quietly, calmly. Lately, the man sometimes felt that his hearing and sense of smell had begun to fail him. Or maybe it was just the fatigue and stress of the last few days taking its toll. He glanced around the park again. No one. It was early. The animals were sleeping in their holes and basements. Sometimes, if someone crawled out early, it was only the hungriest and most impatient. The new, unfamiliar feeling was bothering him. He couldn't get rid of it. The man froze again, listening and looking closely. Who was it? He had recently felt the surveillance. Arkady tried to involve his intuition in the matter. He walked around the park and the surrounding area several times after the hunt. No traces. More precisely, there were traces, but familiar. Usual. Dogs, all sorts of small things. He had recently even found a slug's track and the paw prints of a connecting rod. But these were all known, beaten creatures. And what was this new misfortune? He looks and looks so that she goes blind. A hostile person? Hardly. He wouldn't wait so long. He shot a bullet between the eyes, and that's the end of it. So, not a person. A predator? Then why doesn't he attack? A hungry person won't wait when he wants to eat. All patience disappears. Staring is staring, but the stomach needs to be filled regularly. Then who? A fish splashed near the bridge. The morning wind blew and small ripples crawled across the water. Arkady shivered and tried to listen to his sensations again. The unpleasant feeling seemed to have weakened, but it had not completely disappeared. The man shifted from one foot to the other, glanced at his homemade tackle. And then he noticed a bite. The line tightened and trembled like a string. The loop slowly crawled down and slipped out of the unhooked end of the rod. The fisherman watched the tackle twitch with cold blood. Carefully moving his other hand under the line, Arkady felt the future prey swallow the bait. The strong thread trembled slightly again. Finally. And he had already lost hope of catching anything today. "Come on, my dear, swallow it better." A long pause. At first, the man even thought that the creature had dropped the bait and swum away. But Arkady knew the habits of aquatic creatures very well. Patience is the best weapon in this matter. A light push in the hand, another one. The line tightened. The prey was going into the depths with the bait in its mouth. It was time. The man gave a sharp hook, feeling the creature caught on the hook flutter. Quickly moving his hands, Arkady pulled out the prey. Finally, there was a swirl near the shore, and the rigid back of the aquatic creature appeared from the water. The spotted amphibian hit the water with its tail, raising a cloud of splashes. The catcher made a final effort and pulled the lizard onto the shore. The newt was large. Its webbed feet scratched the sand, and the animal stared at the man with fear and large rainbow eyes. A well-aimed swing of the machete, and the animal began to thrash in its death throes. The second blow calmed the creature forever. The hunter hooked the newt with the toe of his boot and easily turned it belly up. The blade flashed, drawing a scarlet stripe on the belly of the defeated mutant. The man acted quickly. Having skinned the prey, the hunter casually kicked the corpse into the water. By evening, the fish would gnaw it. Having taken out a worn-out plastic container, Arkady carefully lowered the extracted organ into it and put it in his backpack. In the metro, the liver of a newt was worth its weight in gold. Local doctors learned to make a medicine from it that helps with a dangerous fever. Catching, like hunting and stalking, brought a small profit, which was enough to live on. The man was of little interest to the rest. Having completed the usual ritual, Arkady looked around again. Quietly, peacefully, the fog began to dissipate little by little, its ragged wisps crawling over the water, getting tangled in the coastal bushes. The morning was cold. Dew glistened on the grass near the paths, and a cool breeze blew from the lake. The man shivered. "It's really restless today. We need to move home." Near the houses, the feeling of being followed only intensified. Suddenly, Arkady noticed movement out of the corner of his eye and abruptly pulled the carbine from behind his back. The branches shook. A small animal similar to a rat jumped out of the bushes. Limping slightly, it scurried toward the thickets near the shore. The feeling of being followed immediately disappeared. "Damn you!" the man whispered in frustration, clutching his weapon. "You old suspicious fool!" Arkady found his current lair about 10 years ago. The underground hospital, built under the hospital at a depth of several meters, the man quickly adapted into a home. His shelter was located near Sormovsky Park, away from the well-trodden stalker routes, and Arkady was only glad of it. He loved solitude. Arkady felt uncomfortable in human society, out of place. A lone wolf, not abandoned by the pack, but voluntarily separated from it. Conscientiously following the laws of the new world and giving a third of what he got, Arkady could live in peace as he saw fit. The man made a living as a stalker, hunter, and fisherman. He dried fish and extracted fish oil, hunted crankbaits for bile, skin, and meat, set snares and traps, destroying large predators and scaring off smaller, but no less dangerous ones. Stalkers of the capital, the central community of the Nizhny Novgorod metro, did not visit his domain very often. It was too far away, and the area was poorly studied. They did not particularly disturb Arcady. He did not occupy anyone's territory. The Bombar where he lived was too far from the subway to somehow interest the management of the Moskovskaya station. The hermit brought tangible benefits. Besides, he knew the city very well, many routes and wolf paths, and if necessary, worked as a guide. And they did not demand more from him, and Arcady could only rejoice in this arrangement. In the capital, they simply called him the Hunter, or Arcana. Several years ago, when Arcady was still catching newts on bait with a special rope with a loop, this very lasso saved Technique's life. Sitting in ambush, the stalkers did not notice how a huge wolf crept up on them from behind, and when the predator rushed at the guy and grabbed his leg, the hunter pounced on the animal and pressed with the rope until it gave up the ghost. Rumors that the hunter saved Technique spread quickly among the stalkers, and Arcady immediately got a new call sign, surprisingly in harmony with his name. The man did not resist the nickname. Rather, he did not care. He was indifferent to people. Funny and cruel in their desire to survive, they were ready to do anything for an extra piece or cartridges. The hunter did not condemn them and did not try to convince them otherwise. People left him alone, and for that, he was grateful. The sunrise, rosy as a ripe apple, promised a good day. The fog slowly dissolved and fell to the ground as dew. It was beginning to warm up, and the grass glistened with drops of moisture. At the far edge of the park, beyond the lake, someone cackled in a hoarse bass voice. An ordinary morning, like 1,000 others, if you don't count the oppressive emptiness in your soul. Arcady had almost reached home when he sensed a stranger. The hunter froze, listening. Someone was approaching from the direction of Yubileny Boulevard. A predator or a man? A timid hope stirred in the depths of his soul. Nature had endowed the man with excellent hearing and instinct since birth. Arcady did not know what it was. An inner premonition, an intuition, or something else that had no explanation. The strange illness that had tormented the hunter for the past year somehow sharpened his natural instinct even more, helping Arcana survive in a new, dangerous world. Finally, a man appeared from around the corner of the building. The guest turned his head and headed towards Arcana's shelter. The hunter allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. His own. The hunter always recognized his comrade a mile away. A confident gait, a tight-fitting protective suit, a gas mask with a panoramic glass. The technician was the only person Arcana was truly glad to see. Now, after his son had disappeared, he remained the main link with human society, with the metro. "Hello, Arkosh," boomed the stalker. "Is the owner greetin' the dear guest at the gate?" The hunter nodded silently, and the friends embraced. When the short greeting ritual was over, the guest noticed Arcana's confused look. He already knew that the main question was brewing. "Back?" Arcady asked with hope in his voice. The arriving stalker noticed that for a moment, the hunter's eyes behind the gas mask's lenses became animated. A spark of hope flashed in them. The technician shook his head. A silent answer, like a judge's verdict that cannot be appealed. Like a bitter truth that you refuse to believe until the very end. "It's getting light. Soon all sorts of nasty things will be crawling out. Let's go," the hunter said indifferently. They walked to the shelter without talking. The guest even thought that Arcana had hunched over and become shorter. Technician felt the changes already in the airlock. The shower head on a rusty hose was carelessly lying on the floor. Right there by the wall, 2 buckets of water, a brush for chemicals, and a bottle of detergent were forlornly huddled. "The shower is broken," Arcady explained reluctantly. trying not to look at his comrade. "I just couldn't get around to fixing it." The technician only nodded silently. He picked up the brush and began patiently washing the suit. The guy couldn't believe his eyes. Could it really be Arcana, whom he had known for so long, thrifty, neat, and meticulous? Now the stalker saw an indifferent person. He was not interested in anything. He did everything automatically, without thinking. He should have said something, encouraged his friend. But the technician knew perfectly well. There was no cure for such grief. Words would not help here. Finally, the tedious procedure was over, and Arcana tightly battened down the heavy hermetic seal in the airlock. The technician, groaning, began to pull off the annoying chemical seal. The hunter pulled off his gas mask and exhaled noisily, as if he had traveled half the length of the world. "Your diesel is acting up," the stalker noted, listening to the uneven hum of the generator behind the wall. "I know," Arcana nodded. "I should look, but I can't. I can't do anything." My hands drop. "It's true." The technician nodded understandingly and paused briefly. "No news, Arkash," the guy answered dejectedly. "It's as quiet as a tank. I made inquiries. A detachment from the Institute is returning today. Maybe we'll be able to find out something from them." "Are you still hoping?" Arcana finally pulled off his wet chemical suit and threw it on the bench by the entrance. "I hope so. What else can I do?"
Vespali is calling you.
Technician continued.
He needs a guide. He wants to send a squad on a mission. I don't know where. They won't let me in on the details. I was told to be with him today.
"So he was ordered," the man snapped. "The fucking ruler. If it weren't for him, maybe Anton would have stayed alive." They went into the cramped nook that served as the hunter's kitchen. Arcana turned on an ancient electric stove with 2 burners, placed a dented teapot and a saucepan on the reddening spirals. He poured 2 handfuls of grain into the water and began to shave dried fish. "How's the road?" Arcana asked his comrade. The latter simply waved his hand in response, took 3 spent cartridges out of his pocket, and threw them on the wooden table. Then he covered them with his palm and began to move the empty cylinders with his fingers. "Tolerable," the stalker smiled weakly. "I only shot a couple of puppies near the Storm 1. It looks like they got separated from the pack. You could say quiet and peaceful. I've had a strange feeling for several days now," the hunter shared, sitting down on a creaky stool. "As if someone is watching me. I can't even really understand. A person or an animal, I can't hunt calmly, I can't walk, I constantly feel like I'm being followed." "I didn't notice anything like that," the guy responded, lounging on the bench near the table. Then he looked seriously at the hunter and continued. "Arkash, I didn't come for nothing. This mission, in general, it's reconnaissance. Vespali has started a dangerous game. He really believes in his strength. He thinks he can move mountains. His best warriors have captured the Institute's shelter. Good people have already whispered this to me in secret. Today they should bring in the prisoners and bring the loot. Now he will work from this stronghold in 2 directions at once. The Alliance does not expect an attack from there. And how would they know that we have dealt with the Institutes? And Vespali will pull his forces there. Wait for a convenient moment." But he did not manage to deal with the glaciers, too, on the fly. Our squad received a rebuff. They say they were pretty battered there. And Antoka stayed there too, apparently. The hunter squeezed the knife tightly, and the guy noticed how the veins on his friend's hand bulged, and his lips trembled slightly. Arcana knew how to hide his emotions. But now, looking at the man, the technician saw what changes had happened to his comrade, and did not recognize the hunter. Arkady, as if he didn't notice anything around him. His face, which had been covered with a network of wrinkles by inexorable time, became even more haggard, his eyes sunken, He even moved differently. Precise movements became slow, clumsy. The man, who always hid his weakness in the back of his mind, now seemed to have given up. It was as if his friend had been replaced. And this worried the stalker most of all. Although Technician, whose real name was Andre, was almost 15 years younger than Arcana, they communicated as equals. Technician generally got along with people easily. Of average height, stocky, and active, he was known as a ringleader and joker, tried to treat everything with irony, and if any problems concerned him, he came out of all situations with a wide smile on his face, even if he lost. Andre received his nickname a long time ago for his ability to get along with any technology. He was an optimist, a pragmatist, a skeptic, and a carefree, indifferent person. And, despite his rebellious and irrepressible nature, the stalker was a great friend. Soon the porridge was ready, and the old kettle rattled its lid on the stove. They ate in silence. The owner generally tried not to look at his comrade anymore, and Technician realized that it was worth holding off on talking for a bit. His son was everything to Arcana. The hunter, who had long avoided people, lived only for him. The guy remembered well how Arkady babysat little Anton, devoting all his free time to him. The boy grew up and matured before Technician's eyes, and the hunter tried to pass on to his son all the accumulated knowledge and experience. Technician remembered how the hunter found this shelter and lived here with his son for some time. He took the boy with him up there, taught him the basics of survival, instilled in him the skills of a hunter and tracker. The smart lad grasped everything on the fly. And then, when the stalker school took his son away from Arkady, the hunter moved here to live permanently. A heavy groan pulled out of Technic's memories. The guy started and noticed that his friend had dropped the spoon on the table and was clutching his head in his hands. "Arkash!" Technician called out to his comrade. He didn't answer, clutching his temples with his palms. "Again?" The hunter nodded silently. He was breathing heavily, noisily sucking in air through clenched teeth. The stalker knew about his friend's strange illness, but he rarely saw attacks of this disease in reality. Arcana tried to retire at such moments, waiting out the next attack away from prying eyes. But now the attack came unexpectedly, caught him off guard, forcing his friend to show his weakness. "I'll be right there," Arkady groaned, rising heavily from the table. Staggering, he wandered into the next room. The door creaked quietly, and Technician was left alone. More than anything in the world, the hunter loved silence. Left alone, Arcana exhaled heavily and sank down onto the bed with a groan. His palms pressed against his temples, as if that could ease the terrible headache. The man tried not to move. Every movement felt like shots to the head. Finally, the first attack began to slowly recede. Arkady fished a syringe and a small bottle out of the nightstand drawer. Having filled the container with clear liquid, he brought the needle to his hand. He winced slightly when the sharp steel tip pierced his skin. The hunter emptied the syringe and collapsed, exhausted, onto the bed. Arkady didn't know how much time had passed. The seconds were slowly falling into the bottomless abyss of eternity. And he was still lying on the crumpled blanket, not daring to move. The man was waiting for the pain to go away. The silence in the room was broken only by the old alarm clock, which had probably outlived more than one generation. Time dragged slowly, like a decrepit, lame old man. A blow, another blow. Putting his thumbs to his temples, Arcana continued to massage his head, feeling the blood pulsating weakly in the arteries, as if two small hearts had been placed under his fingers. If only the cruel executioner would leave sooner. The bout with headache invariably left weakness and apathy behind. It seemed to the hunter that each attack of the disease took away a piece of his life force. Thoughts crawled sluggishly and lazily, like earthworms. The torture was temporarily over, but now the physical torment was replaced by anxious thoughts about his missing son. Anton, son, what did those bastards do to you? Are you still alive? Or did you die long ago, from an enemy bullet or the claws of a predator? Who could give the hunter an answer that would ease his mental pain, or on the contrary, make him suffer even more? The unfortunate father did not know what was best for him now. Ignorance at least allowed him to maintain a shaky hope. But what would happen when he learned the truth? Or maybe he had already heard it, but refused to believe it. The man did not want to accept the fact that his son was dead. 2 days ago, Arcana went to the capital. He was surprised to find the barracks half empty. The hunter looked at the neatly made bed, the things laid out in their places, and could not understand anything. The commandant did not receive him, citing his busy schedule. The same day, the messenger returned, and in the evening, over a glass of homebrew, Arkady managed to extract from his acquaintance pitiful crumbs of information about the capture of the Institute and about the reconnaissance detachment sent to the left bank of the Volga to the glaciers. But the worst thing awaited him at the end. The group of fighters, of which his son was a member, returned, broken and battered, and Anton was not among them. The hunter's eyelids slowly closed. The pain gradually receded. The medicine he had taken had once again delayed the terrible torture, brought temporary relief, and closing his eyes, Arcana fell into a restless sleep. Slang name for the Nizhny Novgorod metro station, Burevestnik. The darkness did not want to let him go. It held him tightly in its embrace, fettered his will, suppressed his thoughts. Strange images occasionally emerged from the darkness, danced in a circle before his mental gaze. He tried to remember where he was. In the shelter, on the surface, in the metro. An attempt to break through the thick wall of oblivion ended in failure. Where is he? What happened? Pain. Unbearable, merciless. Pain rolls under the vaults of the skull, making you writhe in agony. Thoughts are like flashes of lightning in the night sky, bright, swift. They highlight something dear and lost forever. Visions approach from the darkness, closer and closer. The hunter throws his head back. High up, along the inner surface of the great dome, stars are crawling. Hundreds, thousands of stars. It seems to him as if the heavenly lights are winking at him, calling him to them. It is as if he has returned to an unimaginably distant past, to a world where one can look up without fear or longing. And then, a terrible explosion and a monstrous shockwave breaks this dome, the abode of thousands of stars. It seems as if the sky is falling on him, burying him under the rubble, burying his past life, memories, hopes. Darkness. He didn't know how long the unconsciousness lasted. Finally, the grip of the darkness weakened a little, and Arkady slowly opened his eyes. In the semi-darkness of the room, the alarm clock monotonously counted down the seconds. A thin strip of light seeped through the crack in the door, and a diesel engine rumbled rhythmically behind the wall. Having taken away the rest of his strength, the pain slowly went away. The hunter groaned, taking his hands away from his head, and only now noticed a dark figure sitting on a wooden bench near the table. "Anton!" Arcana whispered, and stretched out his hands to his son. The pain returned again, as if it had shot into his head, forcing the man to close his eyes and grit his teeth. The hunter did not want to show his weakness in front of his son, because he had always taught him to be strong. "How are you?" Anton asked, excitedly, getting up from the bench. He took a step towards the bed and knelt down at his father's head. Arcana felt a light touch of a cool palm on his forehead. He's here. His son has returned. Better already, the hunter squeezed out, smiling weakly. "Are you back?" "I was waiting, worried. I thought you—" "Of course, he came back," the son smiled. "Remember how you said, whoever is faithful always comes back?" "I remember." The hunter smiled and closed his eyes. The pain was receding. Just a little more, and he would be able to squeeze his son in a tight embrace. Look at him, so dear and close. Ask him questions. Arcana slowly opened his eyes and shuddered. Anton's features trembled and began to blur. Now it was not his son sitting before him, but a pale, thin stranger, and madness was visible in his wandering gaze. And through the gray mask of his face, something else, frighteningly familiar, was visible. Arcana recoiled. Where Anton had just been, a huge, furry insect was moving its mandibles. The hunter saw a bottomless void in the glass eyes. Something rustled quietly, and long paws covered in hard bristles reached out to the man. "No!" the man growled, and grabbed something soft and pliable with a death grip. The room swam. The vision began to fall apart. But Arcana continued to squeeze something, as if he had seen the most terrible enemy in his life. "Arkush, let go!" Someone croaked in his ear. The hunter came to his senses and loosened his grip. The technician pulled back, rubbing his throat with his hand. The guy coughed, his eyes watered. Arcady jerked, sitting up on the bed. The pain returned, as if something blunt and heavy had been applied to the back of his head. His temples began to ache again. His chest ached. The man sucked in a hoarse breath, holding onto the wall. "Sorry," Arcana squeezed out, looking at his comrade. "A damn attack. I've completely lost my mind. I thought that—" The technician waved his hand, indicating that everything was fine. Finally, the guy rose to his feet, took a deep breath, involuntarily rubbing his neck. "How are you? Feeling a little better?" "It's better already." The hunter closed his eyes, his hand unclenched. The empty ampule clanged on the floor and rolled under the bed. "Will you be able to stand up?" Technician asked sullenly, looking at his pale comrade. Arcana nodded silently. Without saying a word, he slowly rose and walked into the next room. His head was still buzzing. Blood was pulsing in his temples. His legs were not obeying him well. Opening the sink tap, the hunter splashed ice-cold water on his face, ran his hand over his forehead and eyes, as if trying to shake off the remnants of the gloom. The cold sobered him up a bit, brought him back to reality. An exhausted face with a week's worth of stubble and sunken eyes stared at him from a piece of mirror. He had no desire to shave, and why? He wasn't going on a date with a girl. He was going on a mission. With his head down, Arcana watched the water swirl into a small whirlpool and go down the drain of the sink. The hunter was afraid of the attacks, and not even because of the pain. They seemed to turn him inside out, to raise from the depths of his consciousness something long forgotten and terrible, something he hid behind 7 locks. The attacks became stronger each time, and even with the help of medicine, it was not always possible to curb them. It was time to get ready. But where to? What was the point of the expedition? What was all this for? He had been deprived of the most precious thing, his son, his heir. Anton had become a victim of an undeclared war. He had died not for his honor or his homeland, but for the interests of selfish people. And the hunter himself would soon be driven mad by the damned disease from which there was no cure. If he had a seizure on the surface, When no one was around, Arkady would become easy prey for any predator. Previously, he had been able to predict, sense the next attack, prepare for it. But now, returning to the room and tucking the couch with a tattered blanket, Arkady looked around the dwelling. Light green walls, low ceiling, shabby furniture. Everything seemed alien and unfamiliar, oppressive and oppressive. At some point, the hunter suddenly wanted to run, without looking back from the shelter that had become a torture chamber for him. The recent events had broken him, taken away his hope. Cats were scratching at his soul. The preparations were short. During the entire time of preparations for the journey, the technician did not utter a word. Having guessed the hunter's mood, the stalker decided to wait for now and not ask unnecessary questions. The guy silently watched Arcana, but he seemed not to notice him. It seemed that the preparations distracted the man a little from his gloomy thoughts, and, performing the usual ritual before going to the surface, the hunter again began to resemble his former self. His face acquired a concentrated and serious expression. His gaze cleared up. Arkady examined his permanent Vepr carbine, put on a cartridge belt over the chemical plant with a holster for a sawed-off shotgun, and a scabbard with a hunting machete attached to it. He checked his backpack and nodded briefly to his comrade, who was equipping himself. The friends silently moved towards the airlock. The hunter placed his hand on the cold metal of the hermetic door, frozen in indecision. It was time to go out, but Arkady could not take a step. As if an invisible chain still held him on a leash of the past, here, in the shelter, where the spirit of the missing and most likely dead son hovered. It suddenly seemed to the man that if he took a step, the connecting thread would break and he would never be able to return here, to his former life. Arcana hesitated. "Well, shall we set sail?" said the technician, breaking the thin thread. Arcana sighed heavily and began to open the lock. The sun had already climbed high when the comrades climbed out beyond the fence of the old hospital. It had become warmer, and curly clouds were lazily crawling across the sky. Arcana cast a farewell glance at the gloomy building of the hospital. It was a strange feeling. It seemed to the hunter that he was seeing these walls for the last time, which had become familiar over the years. It was most like seeing off a dead person on his final journey. "Ugh, what kind of thoughts are you thinking? You won't get far with that attitude," thought the hunter, stepping onto the wet asphalt of the road. The technician walked alongside him, keeping an eye on the alleys. Ahead lay a familiar, well-trodden path. The anxious thoughts retreated a little, and the hunter's mind was once again overcome by cold indifference. They walked in silence, looking around carefully. After about 200 meters, the path flowed into a small square, like a river into the sea. To the right, the spires of flagpoles stuck out alone, and a bizarre ship towered on a blue pedestal, looking like a spaceship from old science fiction films. Without stopping, the stalkers rushed through the open space and stepped onto the boulevard alley, drowning in greenery. Here and there, yellow spots appeared on the lush foam of foliage. Autumn was unobtrusively declaring its rights. Vacationers once loved to walk here, but now only the wind strolled alone, and predators sometimes wandered in search of prey. Long ago, in another world, when Arkady was young and carefree, and his life was seething and in full swing, the city was different. Nizhny Novgorod, like a living organism, lived a real, vibrant life. But 20 years ago, the city was wounded, seriously, fatally, and not just the city. The whole world was shot, cruelly and cold-bloodedly. Few were lucky, a few, the lucky ones. What is now outside their city, no one could answer with certainty. Dead, scorched wastelands, without a single soul. Radioactive forests in the same dead cities, killed but not buried. Several times the capital's signalmen managed to fish out of the boundless and lifeless ocean of the ether the distant voices of survivors. A familiar radio operator told Arcana with excitement that they had managed to contact Moscow, Samara, and even Yekaterinburg. A spark of life after so many years still flickered in underground bunkers and metro stations in other cities of the vast motherland. Although what's surprising, if they were saved in Nizhny, then what's worse than the bomb shelters and metro, for example in St. Petersburg, Kazan, or Novosibirsk? In Moscow, in general, there is a real underground labyrinth of tunnels and stations where thousands of people could hide. But surely there were places that were not bombed at all. Mountains, tundra, taiga. And there, too, could live people who survived the last war and preserved the flame of civilization. Arkady was one of those brave souls who, in the first days after the nuclear strike, climbed to the surface and saw with his own eyes a world destroyed by human cruelty. A dark sky, covered with a veil of ugly black clouds, through which the meager daylight barely filtered. Smoke from distant fires creeping in from everywhere, a scarlet glow on the horizon, a river swollen as if in flood. The roads were clogged with cars. Frightened people tried to escape from the city in agony. They all met their death in multi-kilometer traffic jams. The airwaves that once broadcast in a motley polyphony now frightened with mournful silence and the crackle of static interference. In a single moment, everything that had been created over centuries turned to ashes and was consigned to oblivion. And the metro lived, fenced off from the unfriendly outside world by powerful hermetic gates, concrete vaults, and a thick layer of earth. After months of suffering, people gradually resigned themselves to the inevitability and began to inhabit the stations, creating a pitiful semblance of the lost world. The backup generators, waiting for their turn, woke up. The lights came on. The filtration units started working. And this meant that the terrible end was delayed for some time.
For how long?
They tried not to think about it. "The future will show," said the lucky survivors, afraid to think about what might await them in the future, frightening in its uncertainty. Very rarely did passing caravans wander into the city. Strong men, armed to the teeth and covered in 2 weeks' stubble, brought weapons and ammunition, medicines and clothes. Several times the underground residents even managed to get hold of grain and cereals, bargained for seeds, and even sweets for children at a reasonable price. From scraps of conversation, they managed to learn that there were quite a lot of survivors in the vastness of their homeland. Sometimes, the caravanners even visited relatively clean lands where people lived in villages and farmed as in the old days. Of course, the last war threw humanity back a couple of centuries, depriving it of many achievements and important sources of energy. But it was still joyful to realize that the Nizhny Novgorod residents were not alone in the world scorched by the last war. They passed the boulevard unnoticed. To the right, a tall tower covered with advertising billboards peeked out from behind the trees. Nearby, a building with large yellow letters on the roof, reflecting the rays of the morning sun, towered Golden Mile. A large department store, long since ransacked by stalkers, had once been a great help to the residents of the subway. Devastated by miners in the first years after the Great War, it rarely welcomed guests now. People rarely wandered into it now, in extreme cases, to take shelter from bad weather on the way back, hide from predators, or just take a rest. A monument frozen on a patch of land opposite the main entrance. A man on a boat with 2 sails. Saw off travelers with an indifferent gaze. Arcana, who knew every nook and cranny and house here, suddenly remembered Anton's reaction when he saw the monument for the first time. The son, then a 12-year-old boy, looked at the sculpture for a long time, and then, in the shelter, shared his dream with his father. He wanted to find a surviving boat, or even a ship, climb into it and set the sails to a fresh wind, And then, the Volga would carry him far, far away, past scorched forests and dead cities, dismal fields and sandbanks, to unknown lands, to a better life. Is there a better life somewhere? Arcana emerged from the whirlpool of memories and reluctantly returned to reality. They were walking along a once busy highway, weaving between rotten car bodies and rusty skeletons of cars. The Stalkers did not forget to watch their surroundings. They had a forced march of several kilometers in a straight line ahead of them, and even on such a short route, any dangers should be expected. Somewhere, road signs were still hanging over the road on stretched wires. The wind swayed them, creating melancholy sounds in the air. On the right-hand side, beyond the tram tracks and bushes, there was a narrow canal. Sunbeams danced on the rusty water. The coastal reeds, 1.5 times the height of a man, rustled quietly, hiding what was splashing near the shore. Finally, a long body appeared from behind the grass. The water-dweller turned its head and slowly swam to the far shore. The comrades sped up, hiding behind the bushes. The ability to avoid danger was always valued among stalkers. Soon the reservoir with its inhabitant was left behind. The travelers tried not to talk. They were saving their strength and breath. Arcana, focused on his thoughts, did not forget to regularly turn to his intuition. The city was silent. Behind the thick greenery, panel apartment buildings appeared again. The gray ribbon of the road stubbornly stretched forward. The monotonous landscapes of the dead city replaced each other. The technician even yawned, but then noticed that his friend had straightened up and slowed down. Arcana sensed danger like a wolf senses prey, and now seeing that the hunter was wary, the technician clicked the safety catch on his weapon and looked around. The hunter pointed his finger forward. About 15 meters away from them, a wet strip stretched along the asphalt. Its end was lost in the alley. "Slug," the technician hissed. "What a pest. I saw his tracks near the park recently." Arcana finally came to life, shaking off his stupor. "I always wanted to deal with him, but I never got around to it, so we finally met. The meeting place can't be changed." The technician grinned, turning his head. "Now let's see where this carrion is." The trail emerged from the bushes on the left side of the road, crossed the roadway, and went towards a 9-story panel building. With their weapons in front of them, the stalkers walked about 10 meters. Here the tram tracks sharply swerved to the side, running away to the right. Leaving the road, the friends carefully crept to the corner of the house. "Ugh," cursed the technician, accidentally stepping into the sticky mass left by the slug that had crawled past, and began to hastily wipe the sole of his shoe on the grass. The larvae of the mutant lived in the slime, and when they got on a human body, they crawled under the skin and began to eat the new host, getting deeper and deeper. Stepping over the trail, the hunter carefully moved towards the alley. Finally, Arcana noticed movement in the corner of the yard, near a row of rotten cars in the parking lot. A long white body was moving there. The creature looked more like a caterpillar than the mollusk from which it inherited its name. The worm was scurrying around in a pile of garbage. It seemed to have found something edible. "There you are, my dear fellow." The technician grinned maliciously, raising his Kalashnikov. Step by step, the guy cautiously approached the slug. Finally, the creature sensed something was wrong. Throwing away his meal, the mutant turned around, turning his eyeless black muzzle with a pair of whiskers to the stalkers. And immediately the silence was broken by a burst of machine gun fire. The creature managed to dodge at the last moment, and the bullets entered its side, getting stuck in its fat body. Arcana fired after that, and the hunter's bullet knocked a fountain of white slime out of the creature's back. The monster dove into the bushes and disappeared from view for a while. The man stepped back and immediately noticed movement in the bushes, not far from the lamppost. "On the left!" technician yelled, raising his machine gun. The creature turned out to be agile. Twisting like a snake, the slug rushed out of the bushes straight at Arcana. The mutant attacked quickly, but clumsily. The hunter was on the alert. He jumped to the side, falling on his right side. A sawed-off shotgun clanged on the asphalt. A comrade's machine gun snapped with a burst nearby. The stalker was entering the game. Arkady heard either a guttural rumble or a low roar. "I got it," the man thought, rolling and jumping to his feet. Something foul-smelling wafted into his nose. The slimy freak was right in front of the hunter. Technician's machine gun began to pound again, but the bullets passed higher, knocking crumbs out of a concrete pillar. There was no time to think. "Into the entrance!" the hunter shouted to his comrade. The technician, without keeping him waiting long, flew into the dark vestibule in front of the stairwell, followed by the hunter. The front door slammed, and the stalkers flew up the steps, raising radioactive dust that had settled over the years. On the second-floor landing, the guy again got stuck in some kind of crap on the floor, cursed and jerked into the right-hand apartment. The door did not yield to the pressure, and Arcana, grabbing the handle of the door opposite, briskly pulled it towards himself. "It's not locked," the hunter whispered, calling his comrade. The rusty hinges creaked, and the stalkers carefully stepped over the threshold. The hallway was in semi-darkness, and only a ray of light, with dust particles slowly fluttering in it, penetrated the slightly open kitchen door. Right next to the door lay a coat rack, buried under a pile of rotted jackets and raincoats. A dried-out nightstand rested nearby, and small tubes and jars scattered across the floor crunched unpleasantly underfoot. From the corridor, the hunter walked into a small square room with a nook occupied by a desk and a broken chair. The technician stepped over the fallen TV and pressed himself against the surviving glass. The creature had no intention of crawling away. It froze near the entrance, watching for the escaped stalkers. It was noticeable how the monster moved its antenna detectors, trying to determine where the prey had gone. Apparently, the wounds were not serious, and the slug intended to wait for the offenders and have a snack on them. The mutant was hidden by the branches of a tree growing under the windows, so the hunter started looking for a better position for shooting. In the kitchen, Arcana quickly stepped to the window, covered with thick curtains. Carefully moving the curtain, the man stuck the barrel of the carbine between the sharp shards of glass and rested the butt on his shoulder, aiming at the worm's head. The bore shuddered twice, and a booming echo flew along the street. Running up to the window, the technician saw how the creature wriggled on the asphalt, splashing a light yellow liquid. "Ready, worm?" the guy grinned, contentedly. The hunter nodded silently. They watched the slug's agony for another minute. Finally, the creature went quiet and froze like a dead carcass in the middle of the asphalt. The path was clear. Having eliminated the enemy, the friends were finally able to look around. The apartment looked more like a crypt, like the womb of a living organism, slowly digesting everything that was inside it. The wallpaper had faded and peeled off, swelled up in bubbles, and underneath it, the plaster was gray. The rotten furniture seemed to be living out its last days. The tiny kitchen, squeezed by gray walls, turned out to be terribly cramped. Even for two, it was barely possible to turn around here. Dirty cups with the remains of a brown liquid stood frozen on the table. Some kind of purple fungus had settled on the remains of the tablecloth. The technician began to throw open the cabinet doors, checking whether there was anything to profit from here. To no avail. The previous guests had long since scraped out everything valuable. The refrigerator, covered in colored magnets, was also empty. The floor creaked. The hunter stepped toward the second room, and suddenly, he froze, in indecision, in the doorway, as if afraid to go forward. A rat was scurrying around in a pile of rags near a rusty radiator. Seeing the uninvited guests, it darted behind the sofa and fell silent there. In the far corner, a small crib was huddled, and a doll with a torn-off arm was lying forlornly on the floor. Scattered toys were also scattered around. A striped, multicolored top, a nesting doll split in two, and a wooden rocking horse. Arcana turned away. It was hard to breathe, as if the filters of his gas mask had suddenly become clogged with dust. It seemed that every little thing now reminded the hunter of his tragedy. It was time to leave. Arcana nodded silently to his comrade, and they went to the front door. They listened again in the hallway, Not a single sound disturbed the silence on the stairs. Opening the creaky door, the stalkers slipped out onto the landing and carefully went down. A dead creature was lying near the entrance. The dead body was still slightly pulsating, and turbid mucus was oozing from under the white carcass. The individual turned out to be large, almost 3 meters in length. Up close, the slug looked more like a large maggot. Well, what a piece of crap, the technician grimaced with disgust. Having rounded the dead body of the mutant, the comrades came out onto the road again. The little adventure had ended in victory, and they could continue on their way. And again forward, past panel anthills, gnarled trees and piles of rusty junk. 2 pairs of tram rails sadly crawled along the highway clogged with cars. Another hypermarket flashed and again disappeared behind the trees. To the left stretched a concrete fence enclosing low industrial buildings. Here began the dead ends of the Burevestnik station. A sloping roof slightly raised above the ground rested on red brick walls. The station lying on the surface was abandoned and uninhabited. The tall building of the machine building plant's checkpoint loomed over the stalkers like a gray cliff. Here was the familiar stop, the huge signboard faded with time, but still bearing the proud name of the enterprise. A little rest in the station's vestibule, a breather, and then the home stretch to Burnakovskaya. Stalkers rarely ventured into the depths of the Budia. There were bad rumors about it, supported by the testimonies of many eyewitnesses. And although no one could really tell what danger the Burevestnik concealed, they tried to avoid the station whenever possible. The comrades had almost reached the station when they heard a hoarse croak from somewhere above. Arcan's carbine instantly dove behind his back, and a sawed-off shotgun appeared in the hunter's hands. Raising his head, the hunter saw a dark cloud of a flock of crows in the sky. Noticing their prey, the birds rushed down. Having cut down the oncoming birds with a burst, the technician rushed under the cover of the stop. The hungry birds attacked furiously, falling in a crowd on the 2 daredevils. Arcan's sawed-off shotgun hooted, knocking 2 crows out of the flock at once. The already dead body somersaulted in the air and crashed into the stop, scattering black feathers. The second bird, with a broken wing, hobbled away. But then the technician arrived, stabbing the wounded bird with the toe of his boot. Something crunched disgustingly, and the bird went limp. The hunter followed his comrade under the roof of the bus stop. One of the crows darted after them. Sharp claws scraped the man's backpack, and the black shadow soared upward again. Arcady fired a second round of shot into the offender and broke the sawed-off shotgun. The friends managed to catch their breath a little and reload their weapons. Having laid a circle, the flock went on the attack again. Much larger than their pre-war brethren, the crows sometimes posed a serious threat to small squads and lone stalkers. Technique's machine gun rattled again. Arcan's rifle roared loudly. The hunter was an excellent shot at birds. His passion for duck hunting in the past helped him now. Technique glanced at his friend. No, Arcan had not lost his agility and speed. The sense of danger sobered him up, stirred up a wave of rage in him. Having fired at the birds, the comrades darted under the protection of the trees. The crows rushed after them, but there was not enough room for an aerial maneuver here. The creature that had flown under the branches received a butt to the head and sprawled on the asphalt with a broken neck. Along the tunnel wall, the stalkers rushed towards the station entrance. The technician almost crashed into a traffic light pole, dodged it in time, and ran into the glass doors of the vestibule. Glass shards flew, and the hunter ran in after him. The shooters thundered their boots down the steps and rushed towards the large stained glass window. The glass had long since been broken, and several birds had rushed into the vestibule after their elusive prey. The technician treated the attacking birds to lead again. One of the bullets hit a crow right in the head, smashing its skull to smithereens. Having overcome yet another obstacle in the form of glass doors, the comrades burst into the station. Arcana killed the last bird that dared to pursue the fugitives with a sawed-off shotgun. They were almost deafened by the noise of the shot, and the echo ricocheted off the walls for a long time until it disappeared into the dark depths of the station. The voices of birds from the street were still bursting in here, but other crows did not want to get into trouble. The danger had receded, and the stalkers allowed themselves a minute's respite. The technician caught his breath a little, put on his bayonet knife. Behind the rusty turnstiles, a narrow staircase led down into the darkness. Arcana pulled the technician back, who had rushed down in the heat of the moment. "Stop," the hunter said quietly. "We won't go any further. We'll wait on the stairs." The comrades sat down silently on the cold steps. Gradually, their eyes began to get used to the semi-darkness. Patches of mold clung to the walls, emitting a weak glow. From here, from the stairs, they could see a small section of the platform, a dark pit of tracks and the hungry mouth of a tunnel that went into the earth's thickness to Burnakovskaya. Somewhere, water was dripping monotonously. Threads of some kind of slime were stretching from the ceiling. An uncomfortable, gloomy place. Suddenly, Arcana, without saying a word, raised his index finger upward. It seemed as if something massive and alive was moving in the mouth of the dark tunnel. Then the sound was repeated, this time closer. The comrades froze, holding their breath. There ahead in the thin darkness, something large and shapeless was crawling out onto the platform. The black, massive body froze, as if waiting or listening. The stalkers froze, and Arcana felt an icy drop creep along his spine. The hunter had seen the mysterious inhabitant of the storm only a couple of times, but he was still unable to make out in the gloom of the station what it resembled. It seemed that now the unknown creature would hear their wildly beating hearts, discern in the silence the faint breathing of the prey that had come for dinner, and rush at its victim. But no. A weak tremor passed through the living dark mass, and then the thing slowly slid back onto the tracks. The friends heard a gurgling sound. The creature was crawling into the depths of the station. Soon everything went quiet. The technician glanced at the hunter, who nodded his head towards the exit. They knew how to walk silently. With careful steps, the comrades climbed the stairs and crept up to the duty officer's booth, which was darkening in the middle of the lobby. The hunter froze and listened. Not a sound came from the bowels of the station anymore. The mysterious inhabitant had disappeared into its depths again. Having bypassed the turnstiles, the technician was the first to approach the glass doors and looked into the corridor. "Clear," the guy reported. The comrades strained their ears. It seemed the crows had flown away, deciding that their prey had escaped them. The stalkers slowly descended the stairs and cautiously peered out. The street was deserted. "What lives there?" the technician quietly inquired when they approached the exit. "If only I knew," Arcady shrugged. "But the main thing is not to go too close to the tracks. It doesn't go further than the edge of the platform. And did you see the skeleton at the far end? God knows whose it is. It appeared recently. It wasn't here in the spring yet. The birds flew away somewhere." Arcady looked around carefully and waved his hand to technician. The stalkers rushed to the row of trees, behind which stretched a white fence with blue veins. Bending down, the comrades trotted along the sidewalk past the factory fence. A dense wall of powerful trunks hid the highway from them. Only in the open space, where on the left behind the fence, a tunnel dug into the ground, The Stalkers saw crows circling above a high-voltage support. Not wanting to tempt fate and get involved in a fight again, they ran on. Having scared away a flock of rats in a small parking lot, the friends stopped to catch their breath. The tram tracks turned left here, diving into the thick greenery, and the yellow muzzle of a tram peeked out from there. The paint had peeled off in places, and underneath were red spots of rust. Arcana glanced at the high-voltage line. Crows had settled on the diagonals, and several birds were circling above the sagging wires. Trying to remain unnoticed, the friends ran forward. 2 tall chimneys and the powerful body of a cooling tower flashed in the thicket on the right. Ahead, the tall building of OKBM rose. Arcana stretched out his hand, pointing to the brick booth of the ventilation shaft by the road. "The end," Technician exhaled. "What a run. I'm all sweaty." Arcana glanced at his comrade, and a faint semblance of a smile flashed across the hunter's face under the gas mask. Somewhere in the distance, a cawing sounded. The crows noticed the Stalkers. "Hurry!" Arcana urged his comrade. In a few seconds, they covered the last meters separating them from the metro entrance. Rounding the booth, the hunter rushed to the dented iron door, his fingers pressing the doorbell. Chapter 3. The Capital. The hunter quickly rang out the signal, 3 long, 2 short, 1 long. Something rustled in the bowels of the booth, steel locks clanked. The technician turned around and quickly pushed Arcana forward. A swift shadow flashed in the air near the 5-story buildings, then another. The crows did not want to give up their potential prey. "What are they doing there?" the technician muttered discontentedly, clicking the safety catch. The hinges squealed, and a head in a gas mask poked through the door. "Come on in, guys," boomed the lookout, letting the Stalkers through. Arcana was the first to dive into the darkness lurking behind the door, followed by Technician. The old lock on the door, separating 2 such different worlds, creaked. A hoarse croaking could be heard from outside. "You'll get no breakfast," the technician quipped, turning to the door. The comrades went down the creaking steel stairs and waited for the lookout. He slowly followed them down and stared at the guests. "Did you bring this on your tail?" the guard asked in a cracked voice. He was clearly bored. The tedious duty alone here in the ventilation shaft at the very exit to the surface was not a pleasant occupation. "Yes, sir," nodded the technician, hanging the machine gun on his shoulder. "They've got a hold of Berea, damn them. We shot almost 100 there in the spring alone. And now there's a whole flock of them again. Where do they come from? No matter how much you shoot, you still can't get any rest from them. They're breeding, the bastards," the guard complained, throwing up his hands. "How are things up there today?" "The weather is excellent," the technician grinned. "Just right for a walk. Father, let's go. The boss is waiting. Keep vigilant. Break a leg. Good luck to you too, guys." The man nodded understandingly. The lookout escorted them to the hermetic door. He was glad to chat, but he understood perfectly well that the guests were in a hurry. Having stopped in a small passage equipped as a lock-washing room, and having performed the usual and vitally necessary decontamination ritual, the comrades went into the meeting. The exit to the tunnel from here was blocked by a strong grate welded from thick reinforcement. The lanky, clean-shaven guy with a ksuka on a shabby belt did not even check the documents. He briefly nodded to the technician in greeting, silently squeezed Arcana's palm. There was a checkpoint nearby, low fortifications made of pieces of concrete sleepers, fastened with cement, a large searchlight on the ceiling, 2 wooden benches along the walls of the tunnel, and an improvised table made from an upturned barrel. A light bulb on a flimsy wire illuminated the faces of bored sentries from the darkness. Arcady looked to the left. In the distance, the entire tunnel space was filled with warm light, reflected by the ribs of hundreds of tubings. There, in the turnaround dead ends behind the station, was the pride of the station. and perhaps of the entire Nizhny Novgorod subway. The largest farm in the metro was built here in the first post-war years. Burnakovka, 1, small and nondescript in appearance, in fact played an important role in the economic activity of the entire Moscow community. In the distant past, when the Burevestnik station did not even exist, the Sormovskaya line ended at Burnakovskaya. After Buria was built, the local dead ends were almost never used. Old-timers said that they could have been used to turn around locomotives in the event of a major war. But everything changed after the terrible day, when the city, formerly called Gorky, began to justify its old name, figuratively of course, and they finally decided to use the werewolves, only for other more important purposes. The question of creating a farm was asked a year after the Great War had driven people underground.
When electrical engineers at the Moskovskaya station managed to power the autonomous power supply of the Respublika shopping center, and self-taught craftsmen built the first water mills on the banks of the Oka River, right under the destroyed metro bridge, the question of food arose. Yes, warehouses and stores on the surface were still full of canned goods, stale but quite suitable for eating, and there was also an emergency reserve, just in case. But now, a stable and renewable source of food was needed. The seeds found by the first Stalkers were carefully stored and patiently awaited their time. After an unsuccessful attempt to create hydroponic installations, the local miners were given a different task. Now they carried ordinary soil into the metro instead of canned goods and medicines.
In the courtyards, where the radiation was not so strong, the upper contaminated soil layer was removed and the lower one was put to use. At the same time, the dead ends of Burnakovskaya were arranged as a garden plot, lighting was installed, boxes for future seedlings were knocked together, and an irrigation system was made. And, although at first things were not going well, soon, with great effort and persistence, they learned to grow potatoes and cabbage, onions, champignons, and even tomatoes. The farm generously fed the entire Moscow community. The hermetic gates in the tunnel between Burnakovskaya and Burevestnik had been closed since the last war. Later, when an unknown creature settled on the Bur, by common decision, the local masons, just in case, filled the herms with bricks in order to finally calm and protect the farmers. Having said goodbye to the sentries, Arkady and technician walked towards Burnakovskaya, the lights of which were glimmering ahead. The clean and dry tunnel, lit by rare lamps, soon ended at the station. Here the comrades passed another checkpoint, and, having climbed a rickety ladder, stepped onto the platform. The brightly lit station opened its arms, welcoming the guests. Octagonal columns, faced with white marble, supported the ceiling with fancy claw-shaped lamps sunk into pyramidal niches. The floor, laid with dark granite with stripes of white marble, sparkled with cleanliness. Unpretentious, but clean and well-kept, Burnakovskaya resembled a neat housewife, not rich, but hard-working. The residents of the station mainly worked on the farm. Some made a living as stalkers, or went to Moskovskaya to earn money. The left section was used for the movement of trolleys. In the right section, a train was forever frozen, clogging the tunnel with an iron clot. Merciless time had torn off the paint from the head car in some places, and painted the sides with spots of rust. The train had long been inhabited. Apartments and a modest dining room were located in the cars, and the residents had equipped a small workshop in the last one. Arkady looked at the small human settlement. Tents scattered along the platform, apartments' cubbies knocked together from plywood sheets and pieces of furniture, carriage windows covered with rough curtains, and it was as if he was returning to the past. Memories from the time when he lived in the metro stirred in his soul. Snatches of conversations came from half-open doors. Children's cries and the smells of home life, food, sweat, and smoke from the kitchen floated in. He suddenly plunged headlong into the abyss of human worries and problems. He froze, captured by the surging visions, not having the strength to resist them. A trolley that had just pulled up was puffing at the very edge of the platform. The one-eyed, bearded driver with a shaved head looked at his comrades with indifference. The technician thrust a piece of paper signed by the commandant of the capital at him. The cab driver did not even honor the hunter with a greeting. He only glanced sideways and looked away, as if he was not at all interested in the future passenger. "Have you forgotten me yet?" asked the technician, looking at the bearded man with a smile. "We don't suffer from sclerosis." The driver grinned, revealing a row of crooked yellow teeth. The hunter noticed several healed scars on his skull, as if some predator had once grabbed the taxi driver on the skull with a clawed paw. The guy handed the bald man a few cartridges. When the fare migrated into the driver's pocket, he nodded approvingly and waved his hand, inviting the stalkers on board the trolley. Arcana cast a farewell glance at the platform. Children were scurrying between the tents. Children's laughter rang out. A tousled boy, frozen at the nearest column, stared in surprise at the iron cart with armed passengers. The bearded man winked at the boy and pulled the lever. "Toka, are you asleep or something?" the tall comrade called out to the boy. The boy waved his hand at the stalkers and ran back to his friends. A dull pain stabbed Arcana in the left side of his chest. The hunter turned away, caught a glimpse of two shiny strips of rails. The trolley jerked and crawled into the black hole of the tunnel. The platform was left behind. After about 200 meters, the cart dragged itself to the checkpoint. 4 soldiers were on duty at the barrier of sandbags held together with cement. After checking the documents, a stocky guy opened the gate, and the trolley moved on. They rode in silence. Here, in the darkness of the tunnel, diluted by the weak light of the lantern on the nose of the trolley, Arcana was again overwhelmed by heavy thoughts. The wheels monotonously knocked on the joints of the rails. The lantern swung rhythmically, clanking against the welded metal grating of the fence. The spot of light, in the center of which the trolley floated, snatched from the darkness damp walls, colored with spots of mold, bundles of wires, and endless trunks of pipes. For some reason, the shaved cabbie now reminded the hunter of Karen. It was as if he and the technician had long since departed for another world, and now the dead ferryman was taking them to a place from which there would be no return. In the semi-darkness of the station, thoughts crawled sluggishly. What awaited them ahead? Just 2 stations away was the Moskovskaya station, aptly named the capital. A small underground town, the center of the Moscow community, consisting of the stations Burnakovskaya, the neighboring Konovinskaya, Shkalovskaya of the Sormovskaya line, and the distant Gorkovskaya, cut off from the metro by a destroyed metro bridge. What task had Bespalov come up with this time? Would Arkady learn anything about his son? Would he get answers to the questions that tormented him? One half of the hunter longed for a quick meeting with the commandant of the capital. The other wanted to wait, as if postponing the inevitable. A light began to appear ahead. The trolley rolled into Konovinskaya station and began to brake at the platform. One-eyed shouted something to the lookouts, and they waved their hands, signaling them to pass. There were no columns here, and that was why the ditch, too, seemed wider and more spacious than its neighbor. A large vault, painted a cheerful green with pink veins, stretched over the heads of the travelers. Free and bright, despite its simplicity and artlessness, the station pleased the eye, giving a pinch of festive mood. They passed Konovinskaya unnoticed, and their carriage again plunged into the semi-darkness of the tunnel. And again, the clatter of wheels, the endless ribs of the tubing, and gloomy thoughts. With each meter, the comrades were getting closer to the final station of their route. The closer they got to Moskovskaya, the brighter the section became. In this part of the tunnel, there were more lamps. They noticed the checkpoint from afar. The armed fighters checked the hunters' documents, ordered the stalkers to unclip the magazines and put them in their pouches, and ordered Arcana to unload the sawed-off shotgun. Only after the passengers had disarmed did they let the trolley through. Having devoured the last meters of the stretch, the iron carriage emerged from the tunnel and began to slow down. The station opened up all at once, greeting the guests with human hubbub and the usual daytime bustle. Glass-like lamps clinging to the columns emitted a bright light. The tents scattered on both platforms resembled a field army camp, slightly darkened marble facing, with a pattern of the crenellated walls of the Moscow Kremlin. The captain's bridge crossing the middle tracks, a high ceiling supported by mighty columns. A familiar sight, inspiring respect and making one admire again. The capital. They stopped at an escalator that had frozen forever. The driver turned off the engine and waved his hand to the passengers. "Unload!" The cab driver winked with his one eye and finally condescended to say a warm word. "Have a nice day, guys." Slowly leaving the trolley, the hunter looked around. Everyday bustle reigned here. Life was in full swing, filled with everyday activities and work. Stern soldiers from the guard were cleaning their weapons. Traders were praising their goods. Old women were gossiping about something. Children were chatting. Arkady, despite his hermit lifestyle, loved the capital. Unlike other stations, cramped and nondescript, Moskovskaya was striking in its size, cleanliness, and grandeur. They did not skimp on electricity here. The Aka itself worked for Muscovites, turning the blades of water mills built on the riverbank, and provided the entire community with heat and light. "Here we are at home," smiled the technician, shaking the hand of an acquaintance passing by. "Let's go straight to Bespali. He told us not to linger. We'll find out everything and then we'll drag our legs." "Okay, let's go," the hunter agreed, following his comrade. But it was not because of Bespalov's assignment that the hunter was rushing to the elderly commandant. Now he was worried about only one thought, and nothing could drown out Arcana's anxiety. Carefully weaving between tents and stalls, the comrades crossed the platform. Having descended onto another track, they briskly walked towards Chkalovskaya. The hunter recalled that someone had told him that Moskovskaya was the largest metro station in the entire country. 4 tracks and 2 platforms formed a single transfer hub. Here, 2 lines intersected, Avtozavodskaya and Sormovskaya, and the largest community in the Nizhny Novgorod subway had settled on the site of this crossroads. The station had long been connected to a shelter in the area of the railway station. A man-made tunnel grew perpendicular to the Moskovskaya-Chekhovskaya section. The bunker became the main residential area of the capital. There were barracks and the administration of the Moscow community, and friends were now heading there. Moskovskaya Station, this underground city, like an octopus, penetrated the ground under Revolution Square with its tentacles passages. Several years after the terrible day, they were also inhabited, where the underground passages emerged on the surface. Enterprising Muscovites blocked the exits with bricks and blocks. Gradually, having cleared the passages of radiation, the residents of the capital equipped workshops and farms, warehouses and armories there. They even used the damp basements under the railway tracks, which were discovered several months after Armageddon. Gradually, they adapted them for warehouses and mushroom plantations. In the dead-end branch, going to the planned but never built Strelka station, they set up a livestock farm, where they bred pigs and nutria with varying success. The capital used every square meter of its territory wisely and to its own advantage. Walking along the dry and clean stretch of road, Arkady was once again lost in his memories. He didn't even have time to notice how they had walked several hundred meters and turned left into a makeshift tunnel offshoot leading to the shelter. Arcana had rarely been here lately. He visited his son in the barracks when he was still a student at the Stalker school and came when the commandant called. For the umpteenth time today, the hunter's documents were checked. He was ordered to hand over his weapon, and finally he was allowed into the bunker. The comrades stomped along a short corridor and turned into the left wing, into the administrative sector. "To the commandant, on call," said the technician, showing the guard at the commandant's office a piece of cardboard with the signature of the head of the capital. The guy glanced at the piece of paper, then turned his gaze to the technician. "So, Molchanov and Tregubov. Wait, he's busy for now." And he nodded his head towards the rough wooden bench near the wall. "Ivan Andreevich Bespalov, a retired major and current commandant of the Moskovskaya station, was in an excellent mood. Sprawled in a comfortable old chair, the man leisurely smoothed his thick black mustache. Leaning back on the soft back, the major looked ahead, and his lips spread into a satisfied smile. Finally, the Institute fell. One of the allies of the Avtozavodsky alliance was neutralized, and this meant that the first important step in its strategic struggle had been made. Well, hold on. Factory workers. True, Bespalov could not simply sit in his chair and rejoice at such a victory. He was charged with energy. It was bursting to get out, demanding an outlet. The commandant of the capital stood up briskly and walked confidently around the office, stopping near the wall, from where the map of the Nizhny Novgorod metro looked at him with a multitude of pupil stations. 2 lines on it intersected, forming a slightly curved cross. The major inhaled the stale air of the office and squinted contentedly. It was time to put a cross on the past of this city. The Institute, the Alliance, the capital. Weren't there too many fiefdoms where local czars and feudal lords strive to live by their own laws and principles? It was time to break the old way of life. Break it right now. His hour had come. Finally, the major's plan began to come together from pieces. The time of political pygmies and military impotence had passed. He was the creator and builder of a new underground state, and it was necessary to build it right now. When else would a more suitable opportunity present itself? In general, waiting for a long time was the lot of the weak and spineless. Bespalov hated 2 things in life: waiting and inaction. They simply infuriated him. Of course, you can't take everything at once. Only a station whore can have everything at once. But he certainly wouldn't waste time. No, even the years had not dampened his militant spirit. Ivan Andreevich felt 30 again, a mature and full-fledged man and warrior, infected with the desire to win, to gain the upper hand at any cost, to show the enemy what a blitzkrieg is. Why be disingenuous and argue with old lady history? Cities and states have always been taken by force and cunning. It is a sin to violate historical traditions, even now. But first, we need to get rid of all the dissatisfied and rebels. Weed out all the weeds. Pull out the nasty infection by the roots. This city must have one king and God. There is no other. The old wolf's instincts almost never let him down. Like a professional pilot confidently charting a course, Bespalov found the fairway in the stormy and rocky political river. Now he himself would be the first to attack. A little more, and it would be possible to reap the real fruits of victory. to savor the heady and slightly salty taste of power. There has never been peace between the capital and the Avtozavodskaya line. A crack of discord began to appear between the communities back in the year of the Big Ass, after that epidemic that slightly thinned the ranks of Muscovites. The cunning factory workers always tried to pull the blanket over to their side. And then it was even worse. Eternal skirmishes, the division of tasty places on the surface, the bloody fuel war. I can't remember it all. And how can you live peacefully when just 2 stops away there lives another wolf pack, no less strong and ferocious?
Life in the subway has never been peaceful for the last 20 years. The metro is one big viper's nest, where ambitions have clashed, intrigues have swarmed, and tasty morsels have been divided between imaginary authorities for 20 years. For a long, long time, the original borders remained unshakable. Well, we'll have to draw new ones with blood, and a lot of blood will be needed. A small skirmish won't get us off. And then, space, divide and rule. The factory workers have gone completely nuts lately. All you hear is, the Alliance wants to strengthen the borders. The Alliance is establishing trade with the Institute. The Alliance wants... Isn't that too much? Keep your pockets wide open. The wish hasn't grown yet. The Major smiled, running his finger over the map. The Institute is now in his hands. The Alliance can continue to want as much as they like. Big deal. What was yours is now ours. They'll wipe their faces and endure it.
True, the operation was so swift that it looks like the Institute workers didn't even have time to send a message to the Alliance. As they say, they squeezed it out quietly and skillfully. Bespalov had long dreamed of a strong point in the upper part of the city, and from there, they could target the glassmakers. The fucking counter-revolutionaries. The Major cursed angrily to himself. They dug in on the left bank, no way to get to them. A small reconnaissance mission there ended in a bloodbath. Bespalov cracked his fingers, frowned with displeasure. He would get to these guys too, everything in its own time. One defeat was a trifle. The real battle was ahead. Andrei Ivanovich came to power quickly, although he had been preparing for this for several years. When the old commandant fell seriously ill 4 years ago, the capital already knew that he would not last long. And everyone felt that big changes were coming.
The fist of power was weakening with each passing day. It is difficult to govern a state, even a small one, when you cannot manage your own sick body. The scattered flock needed a new shepherd, and preferably one with a wolf's grip. Bespalov took care of everything. Once he was the right hand of the commandant himself. And during this time he managed to acquire useful contacts, increase his authority to the highest level, enlist the support of the people he needed. He even thought about seizing power by force, but time decided everything for him. Yes, the previous Lord was a good man, a good manager, but he was as far from an ideal leader as Moscow was from his ass. The previous commandant held power unsteadily, and in recent years, one could say, he did not even hold it, but barely held it. So much time wasted. But you can't just take the Alliance with your bare hands. The factory workers are a quarrelsome and stubborn people.
They have always been like that, as long as the Major could remember. Much has changed since Ivan Andreevich took the chair of the head of the capital. In 3.5 years, the community has noticeably risen and grown stronger. Bespalov managed to change a lot in the administrative apparatus, promoting people loyal to him to key positions. Having secured their support, the new commandant did not forget to feed the faithful dogs, thereby tying them to himself even more tightly. The head of the capital was pulled out of his thoughts by a knock on the door. In response to the order to enter, a slightly hunched, stocky figure appeared on the threshold.
The faithful dog was right there. "Comrade Major, a prisoner has been brought in," the man reported clearly. "Ah, well, give him here, my dear." Bespalov waved his hand in response to the greeting. In the morning, a detachment from the Institute arrived with captured goods and prisoners. And although almost everyone was left at Gorkovskaya, Bespalov ordered that several people be brought to the capital for interrogation. The guard pushed in a ragamuffin, who was shaking like an autumn leaf in the wind. The prisoner looked pitiful, disheveled, greasy hair, a hunted look, a purple spot spreading across half his cheek. He shifted from foot to foot, not daring to look up at the major. Only now did the commandant notice, after taking a good look at the man, that he was still very young. His overalls were torn at the shoulder, and a greasy, striped vest was visible through the hole. The prisoner tore his eyes from the floor and looked huntedly at the commandant of the capital, afraid to make any sound. "Ha ha ha, slobbering youngsters!" The commandant winced, and he really wanted to look a real fighter in the eye. "Or are they all like that there? It's no fun to fight with people like that. Look them in the eye!" The major barked, making the prisoner jump up in surprise.
Why are you stomping around like a bear about to take a shit?
The major saw the man's lip twitching nervously. Yes, they had done the poor guy a good job. That's how an enemy should look. Humiliated, intimidated, defeated. The commandant's loyal dogs had already shaken everything out of the poor guy. The army's methods of extracting information from prisoners were not particularly humane. Young, inexperienced. He probably hadn't even had time to fight. They had hit him with a rifle butt and tied the poor guy up. "Name?" the commandant demanded loudly. The guy coughed and said in a voice breaking into falsetto, "Vasily." "So," Bespalov pressed, "tell me this, Vasya. How are you living in the second shelter?" "What second one?" The prisoner tried to be genuinely surprised. "There is no second one, honestly." "So," Bespalov softened his voice and shook his head reproachfully. "And there's Yuri Olegovich." The commandant nodded his head towards the tall man at the door. "He doesn't agree with you. And your comrades gave different testimony. It's not nice to lie to your elders, Vasya. Didn't your mother teach you?" The prisoner shook his head, bleated something in fear, and began to pour out fragments of phrases. His hands began to shake nervously. His tongue had melted so quickly. Oh well. He'll still tell you more. He'll tell you a lot. He'll just have to process it a little first. "Yura, take your friend there." Bespalov smiled kindly. "Let him meet Volodya the chiropractor. Have a chat. Go through the necessary procedures. We'll learn to tell the truth." A heavy blow to the solar plexus. The soldier jerked the poor fellow up by the collar, easily, like a rag doll, and dragged him out into the corridor. On the threshold, the commandant noticed a familiar figure. "A. Molchanov, we've been waiting for you. Come in." Bespalov invited the hunter in his usual commanding tone, and turned his gaze to the technician who was milling about by the door. "And you wait a while." The door swung open. Arkady saw some ragged young man fly out of the commandant's office, driven by the kicks of a strong man in camouflage. The tall figure of the major loomed in the room. A slight excitement was born in the hunter's soul. It always appeared when the head of the capital summoned him. It seemed that he was no longer young, but still it felt like the school principal had invited a naughty hooligan on the carpet. This old man really knew how to influence people. Bespalov told technician to wait, and with an imperative gesture pointed to the chair opposite the commandant's chair. Hunter greeted him quietly and sat down. The commandant rested his palms on the tabletop, looking Archon in the eyes. "Hello, hello, Arkady Igorovich. You haven't visited us for a long time. Did you get here okay?" Almost without incident. The hunter smiled sparingly, glancing at the commandant. "May I ask what the matter is?" "It's not that difficult." Bespalov squinted. "You'll accompany my group to the institute. You'll go around, inspect the embankment with the Grebnoy Canal and the adjacent territories." The commandant slowly moved his finger along the map, drawing the future route of the reconnaissance group. "The main goal is reconnaissance. I don't think the glaciers will come to us for now. It's fraught with danger, but you need to be on the safe side. Keep your ears open. Maybe they've already built an enemy nest somewhere nearby. So be more careful there. And who am I telling this to? You have the instincts of a police bloodhound, and you're an excellent guide. You know everything yourself. You'll go under Boguslavsky's guidance. Leave the day after tomorrow morning. Bogus will tell you the rest." "Is everything clear?" Bespalov looked at the hunter intently, as if he had burned him with his gaze. A stern and angular face, as if carved with an axe. Wide cheekbones, a piercing gaze. Tall and lean, but at the same time strong and fit. The major looked younger than his 55 years. This man had an extraordinary strength. He could be kind and friendly, but he could also wipe anyone into dust with one order. Arcana knew nothing about the commandant's past. GRU, Special Forces? Who could figure him out? God alone knows. The major rarely raised his voice, but he still emanated such strength and power that anyone nearby could not help but feel it. "Yes," the hunter bowed his head, trying to keep his voice from shaking with excitement. The commandant nodded approvingly, squinting again. "How are you?" The question followed. Arkady straightened up, coughed slightly, clearing his throat. "Fine, but I would need—" "Got it," Bespalov said, not letting the hunter finish. "Tomorrow you'll dash off to the factory workers with the shuttles. You'll get everything you need from your friend there, so that tomorrow evening you'll be as fit as a fiddle. I need you healthy, got it?" "I understand." The hunter nodded and continued cautiously. "Ivan Andreevich, may I ask you a question?" "Go ahead." The major waved his hand, looking closely at Arcana and wrinkling his forehead. "What happened to Anton?" The hunter's voice treacherously trembled on the last word. Clasping his fingers, Arkady stared at the head of the capital. He exhaled loudly, the wrinkles on his forehead suddenly smoothed out. He had to talk about the combat losses. "Yes, there is no good news for you." The commandant's voice suddenly softened. A paternal note flashed through it. "I personally sent Anton to reconnoiter the glaciers. We weren't planning any military action, but those bastards got into a fight with the scouts. Several of our men died there. They retreated in a hurry, didn't even have time to grab the bodies. He was a good guy and an excellent fighter. I understand you, Arkasha. Please accept my condolences. I feel sorry for the guy, but war is war." Something inside Arkady seemed to snap, and his ears suddenly became blocked. Bespalov added something to what was said, sadly bowed his head, but the hunter was no longer listening. The major's words seemed to put a period at the end of the paragraph. "You probably blame me," the commandant asked, watching Arcana. He shook his head and took a deep breath. It was hard to speak. "Can I enroll Andrei Tregubov in the squad?" Arkady asked quietly. It's more convenient for me with him. We've been together a lot. Already registered, answered Bespalov, straightening his shoulders. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock to Bogoslavsky. He will tell you the rest. And now, Arkady Igorevich, go and rest. Arkady nodded, silently rose from his chair, quietly said goodbye, and walked to the exit. The major watched his guest leave with an attentive look, then sat down in a chair. Bespalov loved efficient and useful people. The hunter was useful, and for this, Andrei Ivanovich respected him. The head of the capital was used to evaluating people in terms of their usefulness. To hell with him. Let this unsociable person burn diesel fuel and occupy a worthless shelter, which the commandant never got around to, because Arcana was an excellent guide, and also with an excellent sense of danger. However, now, perhaps, the hunter will give in. He loved his son too much. Bespalov did not want to lose a useful person. But any game requires sacrifices. Maybe he will survive, recover. And if not, then it must be so. The law of natural selection has not been cancelled. A couple of minutes later, Andrei Ivanovich was already solving other important problems, completely forgetting about his unfortunate hermit father and his tragedy. The capital was getting ready for bed. Another day under the vaults of the Nizhny Novgorod subway was fading into oblivion, and the residents were slowly heading home. The usual daytime hubbub was dying down, and the evening calm was spreading across the station, filling the tunnels and passages. The lights were dimmed, and thick shadows lay in the far corners of the platform. The merchants were raking all sorts of small items and simple food from the shelves. Occasionally, isolated remarks could still be heard, and from somewhere came the irritated cry of a mother driving her disobedient child into a cramped tarpaulin apartment. At the edge of the platform, the guards' boots began to thud dully. Iron clanked. The changing of the guard had passed, and the sentries were returning from the outer line. Exhausted by a 12-hour shift, the keepers of the peace of the capital hurried to get to bed, to fall into the arms of sleep and rest a little. A familiar evening picture. The hunter refused to go into the technician's closet, no matter how much his comrade tried to persuade him. In the end, the stalker simply shrugged and left, wishing him good night. Left alone, Arcana pulled back the flap of the cramped tent he had rented for the night for 3 bullets, and slowly crawled inside. He threw off his hated boots and outerwear that had rubbed his feet, collapsed onto the hard bunk covered with a sagging mattress and an old blanket. He tucked his rolled-up overalls under his head and finally breathed a sigh of relief, assuming a horizontal position. Arcana felt exhausted and broken. Physical fatigue was intertwined with mental anguish, and if the former could be cured by sleep, the hunter did not know how to get rid of the latter. Even a mug of homebrew did not help. It only left a nasty aftertaste in his mouth. The hunter swallowed bitter saliva and rolled over onto his back. My gaze fell on the low canvas ceiling. The day, woven from many events and adventures, was coming to an end. Arcana tried to close his eyes and relax a little. It was not going well. Bad thoughts were creeping into his head, worries were gnawing at his soul. His soul was feeling bad. The day was slowly dying down behind the thin walls of his temporary apartment. Somewhere the sentries were still talking, and the disgruntled muttering of an old woman could be heard. The usual bustle of these people seemed alien to the hunter. He was irritated by extraneous sounds. They prevented him from falling asleep. What was Bespalov up to? What dangerous game was he dragging the metro into again? Living alone, Arcana lived separately, These strategic games were alien to him, and he didn't need someone else's space. A small shelter was more than enough for the hunter. If he lived here, 6 square meters limited by the walls of the tent would be enough for him. The hunter sat up on the bed again, staring into space.
Thoughts were chaotically racing through his head. Arkady suddenly remembered the commandant's phrase, "War is war." Bespelov's words sounded in his head again. "And who started it, you damn bastard?" Arkin suddenly threw out his hand and slammed his fist into the wooden nightstand next to the bed. The wood creaked. The hunter felt a dull pain spreading through his arm. The nightstand rocked and a small bundle plopped onto the floor, Anton's things, which the hunter had taken from the barracks. Something clanked quietly. The man bent down and picked up a pectoral cross from the floor, which had obviously fallen out of Anton's overalls pocket. Why was it there since the boy never took it off? The son didn't seem to believe in God, but he still stubbornly wore the cross around his neck. It made him feel calmer. The hunter clutched the small crucifix in his hand and dropped his head back onto the pillow. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Night crept out of the tunnels unnoticed, enveloped the station, replacing the bright light of daylight lamps with emergency lights, pacified the hubbub of the residents of Moskovskaya, and brought long-awaited silence. There was no familiar rumble of a diesel engine behind the wall, no measured clicking of an alarm clock, no smell of medicine that could not be aired out even after 10 years of the hunter's life in the shelter. Only the quiet breathing of the tunnels and light drafts. Walking at night along the tracks and the station, and an inescapable melancholy. Arkin could not hide from it anywhere now. He wanted only one thing now, to forget, and fatigue finally took pity on Arkin. Sleep mercifully embraced the hunter. The man's lips moved silently, and his palm clutched a small cross on a thin cord. The only thing left of his dead son. 1. Slang name for the Nizhny Novgorod metro station Burnakovskaya. 2. Slang name for the Nizhny Novgorod metro station Kanavinskaya. 3. A community in a bomb shelter under the Gorshkov Research Institute of Architecture and Design in the upland part of the city. 4. A slang nickname for residents of the Avtozavodski Alliance, formed by stations on the Avtozavodskaya line. Chapter 4. From the Depths of Memory. Arkady did not always live in the shelter near Sormovsky Park. On the day when all the major cities of the planet turned into ruins, the hunter managed to dive into a ventilation shaft at the last moment and get into the metro. Later, he heard that 2 nuclear warheads were dropped on Nizhny Novgorod. One fell somewhere on the outskirts, behind the resort village of Green City, the second on the highway leading to Moscow. Stalkers who dared to get so far from residential areas a few years later confirmed the rumors, only slightly adjusting the coordinates of the hotspots. Arkady remembered well the first days spent in anxiety and despair, under the dim, alarming light of emergency lamps. Frightened people, whispering prayers in the darkness, and women in hysterics. Men with pale faces and crying children, calling for their parents. People were beginning to realize what had happened to the world, but they still refused to believe it. The first days were the hardest. Somehow the policeman from the station security and the head of Moskovskaya, Igor Yurievich Platigin, managed to restore order and hold a meeting. It became obvious that the way up was now closed. Everyone remembered well the 2 strongest tremors and the echoes of powerful explosions. Nizhny Novgorod got it good. As for what was happening, on the surface, they were only making assumptions. Already in the first days, messengers sent to the neighbors brought good news. At Kanavinskaya, Bunyakovskaya, and Chkalovskaya, the survivors had gathered in small groups, and senior people had been appointed. They had managed to lock the hermetic gates, and now at least people were not in danger of dying from radiation.
They managed to curb the panic and despair a little and began to think about how to live on. Arkady remembered how a tactical missile had hit the metro bridge, destroying 2 middle spans. This meant that the upland part of the city, along with the only Gorkovskaya station, was now cut off from the rest of the metro. Residents of Moskovskaya did not know if anyone had survived there. But people had managed to take cover at all the stations on the Sormovskaya and Avtozavodskaya lines. Some were riding in the train cars at the moment of the nuclear strike. Some had dove into the metro at the last moment, and others simply had not had time to rise to the surface. When the first weeks of panic and despair were behind them, and it became clear that there was still a chance for life, people wiped away their tears for a while and calmed down, thinking about the future. They managed to collect some food supplies and organized catering, but gradually, it became clear that they could not survive like this, in a disorganized manner. It was necessary to organize a society, choose a leader, resolve issues with food and water, medical care, and much more. It was necessary to create a new state and start everything from scratch. The sky hung low over the city, like an old, sagging roof threatening to collapse on your head at any moment. The wind raised clouds of dust, drove them along the deserted street, and moaned in the sky. It seemed to Arkady that these were the souls of those who had not managed to descend underground on that fateful day, mournfully crying. Several days had passed since the Lenin guys had closed the hermetic seal on the Chkalovskaya-Leninskaya stretch. The Leninskaya management answered phone calls saying they did not want to endanger their people.
An unknown disease had been raging at Moskovskaya for a week, slowly spreading to the substations, Kanovinskaya, Burnakovskaya, and Chkalovskaya. No one could really say where it had come from. They blamed stalkers. Evil tongues were saying that they had brought the infection from the surface, vilely accusing people who, risking their lives, went upstairs for the bare necessities. 7 had already been buried. The small hospital, set up in one of the station's utility rooms, had long since overflowed, but the sick were arriving every day. The handful of survivors in the Nizhny Novgorod metro now resembled a baby taking its first timid steps into a new and unknown world. To accept the inevitable and try to survive, or to give in and die, people simply had no other choice. The way up was cut off, and no sobbing or pleading now they could not return the old world. And, with a heavy heart and wiping away tears, people began to settle in the metro stations with difficulty and pain.
At first it was difficult, but gradually the residents of Moskovskaya organized some semblance of a community, appointed a leader and assistants, and began to divide up responsibilities. There was enough work. Everyone, young and old, worked. They managed to find 8 sets of chemical protection and several gas masks, and the first daredevils rose to the surface to look at the world scorched by war. They returned confused and depressed. They were so shocked by the sight of dead Nizhny, deserted streets, destroyed buildings, and corpses, many corpses. Returning to the old world was now out of the question. In the first month after the terrible day, they went up only a few times, to look around, scout out the situation, and grab the bare necessities from the stores. And just as a small community began to form and grow stronger on Moskovskaya, an unknown disease broke out. The newly appointed station master was worried. The neighbors could easily cut off the power to the cables going to Moskovskaya and the Sormovskaya line stations. And really, why waste electricity on potential dead people? It's better to save it for yourself. And if there is no electricity, the filters and ventilation will stop working. And this is a sure, slow death in the dark. But the head of the new underground community had a backup option for such a case. And while the Stalkers, who found a backup generator in the basement of the nearby shopping center, Respublika, were pulling wires into the subway, Igor Yuryevich decided to send a reconnaissance squad. Perhaps it will be possible to convince the cruel neighbors to take pity and help them. The scouts saw a dreary sight. Abandoned cars, torn wires swaying in the wind, gloomy buildings. It was not easy to walk through the dead city. It was especially hard when they came across a half-rotted corpse in moldy clothes. Some of them were still crawling with worms. When the scouts saw such corpses, they tried to avoid them. The nuclear charges exploded somewhere beyond Nizhny, but the shockwave also covered the area beyond the river. It swept like a wild tornado over the blocks, knocking out windows, tearing roofing sheets off roofs, and uprooting young trees here and there. They pounded the city with regular tactical missiles. They destroyed the metro bridge, and there was talk that Gaz and other enterprises got it. It was scary to imagine if a nuclear warhead had hit the very center of the city. What would have been left of it then? A huge melted crater? A bare, scorched wasteland? Arkady didn't want to think about it. A detachment, or not a detachment, 4 people dressed in uncomfortable, baggy kimza and armed with a police Kalashnikov and 2 smoothbore guns. The same group of them first went upstairs a few days after the nuclear strike.
Arkady, Victor, a tall man of about 35, stocky and silent. Vadim, and a young guy. Arseny, a cheerful joker and buffoon. They walked in silence, trying not to waste energy on talking. "Guys, keep your eyes peeled," warned Victor, the squad leader, examining another chain of animal tracks on the damp ground. The scouts had never encountered any wild dogs yet, but everyone knew that sooner or later they would stumble upon a pack. To the left and right were low yellow houses pressed against the highway. The road stretched forward like a guitar string, squeezed on both sides by red thickets. They walked quickly, avoiding looking into the cars. Victor, with a machine gun, walked ahead, followed by Arkady with a rifle and unarmed Arseny. Vadim brought up the rear. He stopped every now and then and looked back, as if trying to spot something at the far end of the street. But then he calmed down and trudged on. Arkady could not get used to the uncomfortable chemical protection suit and the rubber muzzle that clung to his face. At first, it was terribly uncomfortable, but then he seemed to get used to it and resigned himself to the new suit. "Who knows? Maybe I'll have to walk like this forever," the guy thought sadly. They passed Zhelezno-Dorozhnikov Square and passed the traffic jam. The scouts slowed down. There was only a short distance left to the entrance to Leninskaya station. Vadim looked back again and exhaled with displeasure. "It's somehow uneasy. It's like someone is following us. I've seen them a couple of times. It looks like wild dogs." "Guys, be more careful," warned Victor, carefully studying the area. Behind a 5-story brick building, a low pink booth was hidden. The entrance to the Leninskaya station. A large letter M in a circle was perched on the top of a pyramidal pedestal. In the distance, some building was motley, and no one around. "We've arrived," Vadim breathed a sigh of relief, when suddenly something rustled in the bushes behind the booth. The guy raised his gun, not knowing what kind of danger to expect, and carefully stepped closer to the corner. He moved the barrels and looked closely. A shot suddenly cracked from behind the bushes to the left. Bullets whizzed past, knocking stone chips out of the vestibule wall. Arkady involuntarily pulled his head into his shoulders and with one jump returned to the cover of the concrete booth at the station entrance. And suddenly he saw a terrible picture that made him freeze. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Arseny wheezed and sank to the asphalt, holding his stomach with his hands. A scarlet stain was spreading across the green fabric of the chemical protection suit. "Senya," the commander whispered, catching his comrade. "What bastard?" Victor dragged the wounded man to the concrete wall and smoothly lowered him to the ground. Having taken cover behind the pink building with great difficulty, the scouts looked at their wheezing comrade with horror and despair in their eyes.
"Bitches!"
Victor screamed at the top of his lungs. The wind picked up the cry, and the echo began to multiply it, chasing the echoes between the stone boxes.
We came as human beings! We wanted to talk! And you get lost!
An invisible shooter growled dully from behind the bushes.
We don't need plague-ridden people here! Go home and die! We have wives and kids here!
Life was slowly fading in his comrade. Arkady saw that Arseny wanted to say something. Vadim pulled a rolled-up OZK out of his backpack and shoved it under the wounded man's head. The dying man finally opened his blood-stained lips and tried to say something.
Take off his gas mask!
Victor stuck his finger under the edge of the gas mask and pulled the rubber mask off his friend's face. Arseny sucked in a hoarse breath and began to cough up blood. His hands began to shake. Ah! The wounded man tried to squeeze out at least a word, but it didn't work. The guy was caught by his comrades, but Arseny suddenly jerked and fell silent. Now forever. His arms stretched out lifelessly along his body, and the dispassionate sky of the dead world was reflected in his glassy eyes. Vadim put his hand on his comrade's forehead, closing his eyes in silent grief. The street was silent, and only somewhere above the roofs, timidly, like a young wolf cub, unsure of its strength, the wind howled. How is that possible? Vadim asked no one in particular, in a strangled voice. No one answered him. There was nothing to answer. Their friend left quickly, without even having time to say goodbye. And at that moment, no one even suspected that Arseny had become the first victim in the endless war between the two communities. Scum, Vadim whispered with wild hatred in his voice. I'll kill you. He jerked the machine gun away from Victor and clicked the bolt. The elder was taken aback for a second, but then jumped up and grabbed his comrade by the shoulders. Vodka, don't! We're right here in plain sight. If they want, they'll shoot us all. And we're needed at home now. Understand? Then we'll take revenge on the bitches for Senya. I swear, I won't leave this like this. Victor's words had an effect. Vadim lowered his machine gun heavily and bowed his head. Yes, the guy said quietly, his voice trembling. We won't fight much here, but I'll take revenge on them for Senka. Don't shoot! We're leaving, Victor shouted loudly. Silence in response. Did their comrades' killers hear him? Or maybe the enemies were just waiting for them to come out into the open to kill them all. We're leaving, Victor repeated, addressing the thicket. He turned to his comrades and quietly said, Vadim, Arkasha, take Senya, carry him. I'll take over when you get tired. The leader of their small squad cautiously peered out from around the corner, peering into the thicket near the 5-story brick building. Then he waved his hand, signaling them to move forward. Arkady and his comrade picked up their friend's limp body and carefully dragged him toward their native station. Victor brought up the rear. He moved the barrel of his machine gun from side to side, trying to spot the enemy. In vain. The killers no longer tried to engage in dialogue with the guests, or shoot. They seemed to have dissolved and did not give away their presence in any way. Tears welled up in his eyes. Arkady suddenly felt his cheeks wet. He cursed everything. This campaign, the Leninists who had killed their comrade for no reason, and the uncomfortable kimza that restricted his movements. Having stretched out the raincoat and tied it in 2 places to the guns, they made an improvised stretcher. The familiar road led them back to their current home. But their small detachment had lost a fighter, and this loss was irreparable. Someone barked abruptly from the direction of the houses. Arkady saw one dog slip out of the gateway, followed by 2 more. A moment later, a 4th appeared, thin and rangy, with tufts of fur coming out and wild eyes. The dogs really did look frightening. The first dog bared its teeth angrily, but the animals did not dare to attack yet. "Untie the guns!" Victor barked, and began to free the weapon first. Vadim untied the knots with lightning speed, and aimed the barrels of the over and under at the first,
largest dog. "Get out!" the guy shouted, aiming at the dogs that had smelled fresh blood. The largest dog growled again and stepped forward. A shot rang out, and man's former best friend rolled along the asphalt, whining pitifully. And at that moment, the dogs attacked. It was as if the predatory instincts had awakened in the once peaceful animals, and now they were taking revenge on people for the destroyed world. Two dogs rushed towards Arkady. He managed to snatch the gun from its bonds and swing it, but the dog grabbed him right in the leg. A sharp pain pierced his calf, but at that moment the butt fell on the enemy's head. The bone crunched, and the dog instantly went limp. Victor's machine gun snapped nearby with a burst, missed. Taking a quick glance at the battlefield, Arkady noticed two defeated enemies. The two remaining predators were already looming in the distance, about 20 meters away. Vadim fired a second charge at them, but also missed. With trembling hands, he took the cartridges from his belt and reloaded the gun. "How are you?" asked Victor, looking at Arkady's leg. He winced and touched it with his hand. "It's bearable. I think I'll hobble there. We need to hurry." Having repelled the attack, the thinned and battered detachment sped up. Having placed their dead comrade on the raincoat, the scouts quickly walked towards the house. Arkady limped slightly. After all, he had not avoided battle wounds. The dogs accompanied the scouts almost to the very entrance to the subway. They did not get into a fight anymore, but they persistently followed on their heels at the far edge of visibility, occasionally giving themselves away with a mournful howl or a nasty bark. Nevertheless, the people realized that they already had an enemy on the surface. The entire station saw Arseny off. Arkady turned away so as not to see the tear-stained face of his comrade's wife. How could he have survived with his young wife and then died 2 months later? From a stray bullet. While the others were saying goodbye to Senya, Arkady, gritting his teeth, cursed his hated neighbors. They buried his friend upstairs. They carried the body out through the ventilation shaft above the dead-end tunnel and buried the deceased in a vacant lot, not far from the entrance to the metro bridge. That night, Arkady was unable to sleep. Igor Yuryevich's fears were confirmed a day later. In the evening, the lights flickered, and Moskovskaya was plunged into viscous darkness, as if on the terrible day. However, the newly appointed commandant still knew how to look several moves ahead. A hastily assembled team of electricians managed to start up a backup generator in the basement of Respublika. It was as if the disease had taken a short time out, deciding to take a breather. Several more people died, but the crisis seemed to have passed. The Leninskys did not even think of opening the hermetic seal. Apparently, they decided that Moskovskaya was finished. And the Muscovites did not expect help from the other side now. For them, enemies now lived there. Inhuman beings who abandoned them in their most difficult time. Such things were not forgiven. Arkady was sitting in the management office. His leg had almost healed, but Igor Yuryevich hadn't let him go on the last 2 trips. "When you get better, you'll go, but for now, don't set foot up there. You'll wait a bit," the station chief instructed in a fatherly manner, throwing up his hands. Today the detachment was very late, and Platigin could not find a place for himself. He paced the cramped room with huge strides, froze and frowned every minute. And Arkady was worried. They were supposed to be back at 10. It was already past noon, and the detachment was still not there. It would be one thing if they had gone somewhere far, but they had set out to walk around the station area. And it was as if they had vanished into thin air. Anxiety had settled somewhere inside. And looking at the owner of the office, who was muttering something under his breath, Arkady understood that Igor Yuryevich was more worried than he was. "I don't like all this," Platigin finally blurted out. "Where did they disappear to?" "They'll come back," Arkady assured the chief, but, listening to his tone, he realized that he didn't really believe himself. Igor Yuryevich glanced at the guy sideways,
but said nothing. The telephone on the table suddenly began to ring, unexpectedly. In the blink of an eye, the interlocutor jumped up to the device and instantly snatched the receiver. "Platigan is listening, Igor Yurievich. The detachment has returned." A muffled voice rattled. "They brought important news. You'll have it soon." "Well, thank God," the owner of the office exhaled. "Is everyone alive there?" "That's it," the caller reassured. "They'll clean up now and come to you." When Victor stepped through the threshold of the room 20 minutes later, Igor Yurievich was already beside himself.
"Well, finally," the station master thundered. "We're all exhausted. Where the hell have you been?"
"Gosh, I'll tell you everything now," Victor smiled, plopping down into a chair. "You can't even imagine what we found."
"Come on, tell me already. Don't keep me in suspense."
Igor Yurievich got furious, glaring angrily at the guest. He grinned and began.
"We have a whole shelter with survivors right here," Victor muttered happily. "There, near the railway technical school. Only 400 meters from the station. It was raining in the morning. We found tracks near the Chkalov. We poked our heads into the alleys, and they were already waiting for us. True, at first we were a little afraid. They were also armed, but not much. A couple of cop Kalashnikovs and a shotgun. They themselves were also glad to see us.
They just didn't let us into the bomber. But we wouldn't have gone ourselves." We chatted with the senior in their dressing room. About 1,500 people were hiding there. They have medicine, canned food, chemicals. They promised to help as much as they could. But the electricity is tight, the diesel is old, it's acting up. Everyone is afraid that it might break down completely. We promise to help them as much as we can. All we need is to cope with the disease. Igor Yurievich listened silently and only occasionally nodded approvingly. A satisfied smile spread across his face. A bomb shelter not far from the station, and they have chemicals, people, medicines. The last one interested the commandant most of all now. You have to be friends with such neighbors. Establish relationships. The diplomatic mission was organized the next day. The negotiations were peaceful and friendly. The neighbors promised to help with medicines and were happy to have new friends. The railroad workers did not oppose the unification. The only obstacle was that the only way to get from the shelter to the metro was on horseback. Igor Yurievich studied the map for a long time, measured something with a school wooden ruler, and estimated.
It's about 100 meters to the shelter from the crossing. If you want, you can dig through.
It was clear that they could only survive by uniting and helping each other. Platigan understood that the neighbors on the Avtozavodskaya branch had long ago set a course for separation.
These Leninists are a cut-off piece.
Igor Yurievich thought angrily and, remembering the railroad workers, smiled.
Thank you, brothers. Now we'll have some more kicking to do.
Gradually, the crisis passed. The disease was overcome, albeit with difficulty. The railway workers and Muscovites were establishing relations and seriously considering the construction of a man-made tunnel. Autumn came unnoticed, cold, damp, and dreary. The sky was still covered with thick clouds, and people prepared for a harsh winter. Local craftsmen built several mills on the banks of the Oka, and small hydroelectric power stations began to work for the needs of Moskovskaya. Thanks to new friends, it was possible to replenish the stock of chemical protection suits a little, and now the first Stalkers, someone aptly called the Scouts Miners this way, remembering the computer game of the same name, gradually began to develop the surface. In the hunting store and the guard's closet, located not far from the station, they managed to get hold of hunting rifles and several machine guns with ammunition. Sometimes the miners encountered packs of wild dogs, but now the Stalkers were already able to repel the predators. Even Igor Yurievich himself went up once, praised the windmills, was sad, looking at the city, which several months ago left life. The station chief looked at the dark water of the Oka for a long time, his gaze sliding over the hills of the opposite bank. After this trip, Platigan did not leave the thought that there must be survivors on Gorkovskaya too. Sometimes, looking at the map, he would freeze for a long time, examining the mountainous part, and wrinkles would furrow the face of the head of Moscow. Everything resolved itself. October came, and it became even colder. One evening, during an inspection of one of the mills, a squad of stalkers climbed onto the metro bridge. In the thickening twilight, the dark water and cloudy sky seemed otherworldly, ominous. Arkady looked around. The gloomy multi-story buildings towered like gloomy masses, the thickets on the island that lay like the carcass of a giant beast under the metro bridge seemed frightening and ominous. Somewhere behind the ridge of city ruins, a long howl was born, flew over the dead quarters, and fell into the muddy waters of the Oka.
It was time to go back. The inhabitants of the city slums went out hunting, and it was easy to run into a pack of hungry wild dogs. Victor turned on the flashlight, directed the slippery beam forward, along the roadway, and suddenly, there was an answer from the other side of the river. A small star-like light flashed there, blinked, and went out, and a few seconds later, it lit up again. There was no doubt there were living people on the other side of the metro bridge. People! Mishka the electrician suddenly exploded, causing his comrade to involuntarily shudder. People, damn them! And suddenly, without saying a word, he jumped up and ran across the bridge, waving his lantern. Where to? Arkady shouted and rushed after his distraught comrade. He remembered. Mishka told him that on the terrible day he saw his wife and son off to the train going to Gorkovskaya, and he himself was delayed at Moskovskaya. It was clear why the electrician had rushed to the other bank. Mikhail stopped about 20 meters before the place where the canvas ended and the abyss yawned. The Oka River crawled like a dark ribbon below, and there, on the other bank, a small light was looming. People. There were people on that bank, and Arkady had no doubt about it. "Hey, on the other side!" the electrician yelled, and began to draw circles with his flashlight. The spot of light began to blink and move, as if confirming that the signal had been received. The others ran up. "Give me the flashlight!" Vadim extended his hand, but Mishka pulled his hand back and stared dumbfoundedly through the glass of his gas mask at his comrade. "Are you nuts or something?" Vadim raised his voice. "I went to a radio amateur club. We learned Morse code. Hurry up, I'll try to send them a signal." "Give it to me," Victor said in a commanding tone. Mishka obeyed and handed his friend the flashlight. Vadim confidently took it and started working the switch. 2 long ones, short, long, short. He paused, and then again began, winking at the strangers on the other bank. "What did you tell them?" Victor asked excitedly. "Metro, tomorrow, here." "I don't know if they'll understand. I hope they'll at least remember it and be able to decipher it later." They stood for some time in the cold, piercing wind, peering into the thickening darkness, but the light on the other side went out and did not appear again. It was almost completely dark, and the gloomy buildings seemed ominous, concealing a threat. A fine rain was drizzling. A few droplets fell on the glasses of Arkady's gas mask. The man brushed them away with his glove and glanced at his comrades. They noticed that some black flakes had begun to swirl in the air. Vadim caught one of these snowflakes and rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. "Ashes," he said. "Our world has burned."
Let's go home. Otherwise, Yurich will bite off all his nails. And so we've been delayed.
Let's hope that they received the signal on the other side. Vadim waved his hand and was the first to trudge back. His friends hurriedly followed him. It was necessary to quickly inform the station master of the important news. It seemed that the icy wind had gone right to his bones, and Arkady could not warm up for a long time after the hike. He kept thinking and thinking. Could there really be survivors there, on Gorkovskaya? And why not? People had taken refuge at all the stations across the river in the city, and why was Gorkovskaya any worse? And even if many people had been saved there, Mishka would find his family. And he. The pain of loss stabbed him in the ribs, and memories came into his head. His happiness remained there, above. His parents and the only one he loved, and whom he had not managed to save. Arkady returned to reality with difficulty. His comrade looked at him with hope. They were sitting in a train car that had stopped that fateful day in the tunnel leading to the metro bridge. The train had long ago been converted into a dormitory, divided into tiny apartments, furnished and inhabited. Someone was fiddling around behind the thin plywood wall, and the neighbor's child was being capricious. "Do you think they will come to us?" asked Misha when his friend sat down next to him. "I don't know," Arkady shrugged. "I hope they decipher Vodka's signal. Although who knows, where were they coming from? There's a platform there where the tunnel goes into the ground. From there, probably. You know, I still hope." Mishka's voice trembled, and he lowered his gaze. "I want to believe in it, too." Arkady patted his comrade on the shoulder encouragingly. His friend smiled sparingly. Let it be as his comrade dreams. Let it be. The Gorkyites did not show up the next day. In vain did the Moskovskaya messengers spend the entire evening in the autumn wind at the edge of the metro bridge, signaling with a lantern and peering into the distant opposite bank. No one answered them. Why? Perhaps their signals were simply not understood? What if Gorky had the same disease and the station was slowly dying? What if the unfortunate people sent a message to the people on the other bank and waited for rescue, and the Muscovites were slow? Arkady expressed his fears to the station master, but Platygin only gave him a distrustful look and said nothing. The Muscovites themselves did not dare go to the Gorkyites. There was a bad lokalka at Strelka, and with the pitiful NBC protection suits that they had, there was no hope of getting through it painlessly. But Igor Yuryevich hoped that the Gorkyites might have better suits. All that was left was to wait. The hardest thing was waiting for Mikhail. Arkady saw how the guy was suffering. His comrade was wandering dejectedly along the platform. Several times he tried to talk to the station master. Once he even decided to, but was immediately turned away. "Let's wait a little longer," said Igor Yuryevich. But his words were filled with uncertainty and doubt. Finally, after a few days, Platygin broke down. Having gathered all the stalkers in his office, Igor Yuryevich began to outline his plan. "Let's try to break through," said the station master. "Go through here." His finger slowly traced the route on the map. "Go around the vestibule on the Lenin side, over the bridge and the Oka exit, and then to Gorky Square. In case of danger, go back immediately. We don't need any more dead here. We've buried quite a few last month. So heroism is heroism, but use your head too. Who knows what it's like on the other side? Maybe they've got some surprises in store for us there." They discussed everything, down to the smallest detail, prepared the equipment and weapons in advance, and held a briefing in the evening. Arkady slept badly that night. He tossed and turned on the hard bunks, woke up and then fell into an uneasy slumber again. He dreamed of strange wandering lights, packs of wild dogs and mountains of dead people in the dark lobby of Gorkovskaya. Perhaps there was no one on the other side, only deception and delusion. Or was there?
Tomorrow will tell. Shaggy clouds were rushing low over the city. Here, on the bridge, a cold wind regularly blew, throwing water suspension into the face. A fine rain began to drizzle. The wind wrinkled the surface of the river, drove the waves against the current, and sometimes it seemed as if the Oka had turned back. A deserted embankment, encased in gray concrete, a gloomy sky above, dark waters of the river. It was depressing, enough to make you howl like a wolf.
Arkady, let's not be late. Victor's voice drove away extraneous thoughts and brought him back to reality. The black and white striped curb like a chessboard stretched forward. A few minutes later, they passed a red and white tram. The doors were wide open, the wind was blowing inside, and desolation reigned. A torn wire, swayed by gusts, was scraping along the roof of the tram with a nasty sound, causing even more melancholy. Arkady even imagined how people in panic would fall out onto the roadway of the bridge, not knowing what to do, where to run. Frightened screams, screeching brakes, and crying children. And over the surface of the river, over the roofs of high-rise buildings and avenues, the roar of a siren was carried, foreshadowing the imminent Armageddon. Arkady had been trying not to look into the cars since he had passed one of the cars at the very beginning of the bridge, and, unable to resist himself, had looked inside. A light sedan had apparently crashed into a stopped SUV at full speed. The guy saw the driver's corpse, his withered hands clasped around the steering wheel. His gaze slid further to the back seat. The guy saw a large doll, with tangled dirty hair and eyes forever closed. He saw the very edge of a child's seat, and the sleeve of a pink jacket. "Oh my God!" Arkady whispered and turned away, feeling his legs give way. The worst thing was not the realization that the whole world had died, burned in the fire of an atomic fire in a matter of minutes. The worst thing was here, in the back seat of the car, in the child's seat. Someone shook the scout hard by the shoulder. Arkady shuddered in surprise and turned around instantly. Vadim stared at his comrade through the glasses of his gas mask. "No need," the comrade shook his head slowly, squeezing Arkady's shoulder tighter. "Don't look. It will only get worse. Nothing can be changed now." "Yes," Arkady muttered quietly into the filters and trotted off, after his friend. Gradually he calmed down. His breathing evened out. Closer to the middle of the bridge, the wind became stronger. Surprisingly, after 2 months spent underground, the guy felt uncomfortable in this vastness. How quickly they had become unaccustomed to the real world, having climbed underground. Arkady felt sad. Here and there the scouts had to go around cars and buses blocking their way. The river was left behind, and now the road stretched forward between the hills. To the left was a bare hill, with sparse bushes and a serpentine path running down under the bridge. To the right was a high hill, completely covered with red trees. The road turned steeply to the left and crawled up the mountain, making a turn of almost 180 degrees. From here, almost the entire part beyond the river and the wide ribbon of the river, cutting the dead city in two, were visible. Nizhny Novgorod lay before the scouts as if on the palm of their hand, mutilated and abandoned. Soon the first high-rises appeared ahead, on the hill, and skirting a ravine the road ran under a viaduct. A pedestrian crossing arched over the highway like a hump, and behind it, "Attention!" said the commander, raising his hand. "There's some kind of gray fog ahead." Now the rest of the scouts saw it. A thick, ash-gray fog, like smoke, was spreading across the area. Treetops and the roof of a nearby multi-story building could be seen peeking out from it. "What the hell is this?"
Vadim asked anxiously, looking into the gray haze. Is something on fire, maybe? If something was burning, you would have heard it. And what would be burning there now? Everything has already burned out, Victor shrugged. What are we going to do? Came from behind. Turn around? God knows what the hell this is. Stay here, Victor ordered.
I'll check. Having separated from the squad, Victor went towards the fog. Everyone was watching the leader closely. Now he passed the crossing and a low shop by the side of the road, and came right up to the gray shroud. The scouts saw how the haze slowly flowed around and enveloped the squad leader. His outlines began to slowly dissolve in it. After standing for about half a minute, Victor waved his hand, signaling the others to come to him. The squad slowly moved forward. A pedestrian crossing floated overhead. They passed a bus stop. Here was the commander, alive and well. Arkady could tell from Victor's eyes that he was smiling. Let's move on. It looks like there's smoke after all. The elder waved his hand and was the first to step forward. Now they walked slowly, closer to each other. Soon the haze became so thick that Arkady could hardly see the back of Victor, who was walking ahead. Cats scratched at his soul. What kind of strange misfortune was this?
The guy could not see anything in this haze.
On the right, in the fog, the vague outlines of trees seemed to appear. On the left, something huge towered. They were probably already approaching Lyadov Square. And from there to Gorky Square, a stone's throw. But would they reach it in this gray haze? Arkady listened. It seemed to him that a strange sound came from ahead. It seemed like a voice. No, it couldn't be. It was his imagination. Stop! Victor ordered quietly, raising his hand. The scouts froze. There's someone there, the elder said quietly, raising his carbine. In the fog surrounding the detachment, anything could really have been imagined. But now Arkady thought he saw movement ahead. The guy looked closely and shuddered. A lone figure was staggering in the gray haze. The guy saw only the vague and indistinct outlines of a person. Where could there be living people here? It was simply impossible. Arkady saw the silhouette sway and disappear, and nothing. Only clouds of fog crawling along the ground, hiding everything from the eyes of the unexpected guests. Where is he? Vadim whispered nearby, moving his gun from side to side. Arkady felt a cold bead of sweat creep down his back. Whatever he said, he was scared. The others also tensed up, raising their weapons. A few more steps. The fog hid the outlines, devoured the sounds. Even the echo of the steps seemed somehow cottony, colorless. Oh God, Arkady squeezed out and froze, looking at the terrible picture that opened up. His hands dropped limply. A young woman lay on the road without any protection. She was still alive, and next to her dying mother, two small figures huddled together, wrapped in protective suits that were too big for them. The stranger stirred, and Arkady and the woman's eyes met. "Help!" the unfortunate woman whispered, barely audibly, and lost consciousness. Chapter 5. Visiting the Enemy. The awakening was long. A heavy drowsiness like an octopus clung to the disobedient body, constraining movements, clouding thoughts. Arkan stirred and finally opened his eyes. Sleep retreated reluctantly. The remnants of the night visions melted away like clouds in the sky after a storm. Arkady did not really remember what he had dreamed, but he felt broken. Sleep did not bring relief, did not smooth out the suffering and anxiety, did not heal the mental wounds.
It only dulled the memories a little, but now that consciousness had returned to the real world, the hunter again felt the weight of his grief. The hand that was pushing him belonged to the technician. The guy moved away from the bed a little, and, touching the ceiling of the tent with the top of his head, began shaking his friend lying on the bunk again. "Arkady, wake up," the comrade commanded cheerfully, in an army manner. "Let's go. While you open your eyes. While we go to headquarters for papers and for instructions.
We have more than enough work today."
Yes, we need to get ready. Archon sat up on the bed and stretched his neck. "And why did you jump up at the crack of dawn?" "I can't sleep," the technician said. "My neighbor caught a cold that made him completely hoarse. He was coughing his heart out all morning, so I didn't really get any sleep. I decided to at least wake you up, because you were completely out of it last night. I was afraid you might oversleep." "Yes, thank you," nodded Archon. He dressed slowly, put his son's things in a backpack. The technician silently watched the hunter's preparations, but did not say a word. 5 minutes later, Archon was ready. "Let's go to headquarters." The technician waved his hand. "While you get your pass, I need to report on yesterday's walk. I'll get things done in the morning, and I'll take a nap in the afternoon before the hike, when that consumptive leaves for work." Morning slowly came into its own. The station slowly woke up, filling with familiar and usual sounds. 20 minutes later, the comrades were already in the shelter. Here, the technician left Archon, and the hunter went to the assembly point. People were slowly arriving. Shuttle traders and loaders, with security guys, were sitting on wooden benches. All those who were supposed to leave with the caravan, to the factory workers today, having shaken the outstretched palms. Arkady squeezed into the corner and settled down near an ancient poster, telling about the damaging factors of a nuclear explosion. The pot-bellied captain with a single star on his left shoulder strap silently nodded to Archon and again delved into reading a tattered notebook laid out in front of him on the table. When, 15 minutes later, all the caravanners were assembled, the 1 star gave a short briefing and handed out passes to those present. Rectangular cardboard boxes, signed in Bespalov's sweeping handwriting.
"Everyone to breakfast, then the guards to the armory," the instructor commanded in a colorless voice and turned away from the caravanners as if they no longer interested him. The caravanners perked up, chairs rattled, everyone slowly made their way to the exit. Arkady joined the end of the line and walked with the others to the dining room, from where the tantalizing smells of breakfast being prepared were already wafting.
"I've reported."
Arcana was carefully nudged by the elbow of the technician who had appeared out of nowhere. "Thank God. They didn't bother me with these scribbles today. I'll have breakfast with you." After waiting a bit for the guards to finish eating, the caravanners filled the spacious dining room. Having slipped in a coupon for distribution and taken his portion, technician landed next to the hunter. They ate in silence, cautiously listening to the conversations. They chatted about the usual: work, patrols, and health.
At the nearest table, a broad-shouldered loader, remembering someone's mother, cursed his careless neighbors. "No, these guys have gone completely nuts." The big guy slammed his fist on the table. "The guys told me they found an untouched fold. They didn't have time to take it all out at once. They decided to leave it. The next day they rushed for the rest, and there was nothing. The Lenin guys had already cleaned everything up after them. It's not fair," came from the right. They picked up the conversation and began to recall recent skirmishes with the factory workers. They often liked to gossip about their neighbors. And how could it be otherwise when Muscovites and Oftozavod workers are like cats and dogs? Either the neighbors accidentally shoot at a stalker squad or underpay for the supplied energy. According to the documents, a truce, but in reality it always turns out differently. 20-year feud cannot be smoothed over with one piece of paper with a seal.
I wonder what they eat for breakfast on Leninskaya, asked Arkady's neighbor, a young guy with a thin mustache under a sharp nose, briskly working with a spoon. Let them swallow even the fresh shit, I don't care about them, muttered the mustachioed caravan driver, shaking his spoon. Last time these cheapskates undercounted my vegetables. Ours, you see, bend their backs in the garden beds, and these are like this. And yet it seems to me that we will have a richer selection in the canteen, the technician noted, looking at the disputants. It's a sin to complain. Oh well, Arkady waved his hand, trying to ignore the empty chatter. Of all his thoughts about his missing son, one stood out. He needed to get medicine from a doctor he knew at the Park of Culture. The attacks began to come more often, and, remembering the latter, the hunter involuntarily shuddered. Breakfast time was coming to an end. Restaurants and cafes had died out 20 years ago. And now the culinary delights of the subway were ordinary stewed pork and mushroom soup. The technician quickly finished his stew, finished his tea and potato pancake in half a minute, and now he was bored, looking at the low ceiling. The rest of the caravanners were finishing their meal. The dishes rattled at the reception table, the cook shouted something, and somewhere water began to rustle. At the exit, the technician turned to his comrade. Well, be it, Arkash, the friends slapped their palms. I'll pack your things and get some chemicals so you don't have to struggle later. Give my regards to the Leninskys until the evening. Until the evening. The hunter smiled sparingly, watching technician go. Then he joined the tail of the caravan group, splashing towards the station. The final preparations remained ahead. In an hour, the caravan would leave for Leninskaya. The senior guard waved his hand, giving the order to move out. The first trolley, saddled by guards, snorted and disappeared into the mouth of the tunnel. The second one, loaded with bales and boxes, slowly followed. Arkady settled comfortably in the corner and looked ahead at the flashing tubes and frequent lamps clinging to the walls of the tunnel. They lingered a little at the outer checkpoint of Moskovskaya, and then the carts rolled on to neighboring Chekhalovskaya. Arkady's neighbor, his old acquaintance Nikolai, clearly suffered from a lack of communication, and words flowed from him like a river. He had a bad quality. Kolya rarely listened to his interlocutors, talked incessantly, and always considered himself the main participant in the conversation. The hunter good-naturedly acknowledged Nikolai's right to maintain the conversation, and sat silently, trying to distract himself from gloomy thoughts and at least a little to understand the essence of the conversation. In vain. Amidst the harmless chatter, Arkan did not notice how they reached Chalovskaya. The hunter turned his head, looking at the station, where he had not been for a long time. A large whitewashed vault stretched over the heads of the caravanners, divided in the middle into two parts by a blue path dotted with lamps. Tents and benches were crowded on the platform. People scurried about here and there. The modest station did not stand out in any way, and it did not seem to be trying to attract anyone's attention, intrigue, surprise. Chekhalovskaya floated past and was left behind. The trolley passed the outermost checkpoint, a real fortress compared to other defensive lines. Powerful barriers made of sandbags, sleepers, and bricks, a machine gun point, 24 fighters on duty here day and night. A guarantee of safety in case the neighbors suddenly decided to attack the capital. Their trolley, its wheels clacking, was slowly slowing down. The border awaited the caravanners ahead. Several hundred meters of no man's land, beyond which the Alliance checkpoints began. A bright beam of light suddenly hit his eyes. Arkan screwed up his eyes and, slightly lifting his eyelids, made out the structures of his neighbor's outermost border in front of him.
The factory workers were in no way inferior to the Muscovites in defensive tricks. The trolley devoured the last meters and stopped in front of a barrier of sacks and concrete sleepers. "Take out the magazines. Prepare for inspection." An authoritative voice came from the front. There was a scuffle and clanking of iron. The guards were taking out the magazines and putting the machine guns on the floor of the trolley. Arcady just watched silently. "Surrender your weapons," came a new order. "What kind of innovation is this?" the senior guard said discontentedly. "The weapons will remain with us. We will hand over the magazines. Everything as usual. You will do as usual at home. This is an order from the authorities. It is not discussed," they reported calmly from the barricades. "Hand over your weapons and magazines, or turn around and go home. We don't have time to sharpen our mugs with you." There was a murmur of discontent behind him, but the elder quickly quieted the din by raising his hand. Then he whispered something to his neighbor. The latter nodded, angry and sullen. "Prepare your weapons for surrender." When the fighters from the outermost line took the weapons and magazines from the convoy guards, the senior guard of the factory workers waved his hand, giving an unspoken order to open the gates. The massive gate in the fence, rumbling with effort, crawled to the side, opening the way to the station. The trolley slowly rolled forward. The hunter managed to notice a dimly lit side tunnel leading to an underground facility. The former command post of the metro. Arcady himself had never been there, but he knew that the powerful diesel engines that supplied the entire underground with electricity in the first months were located here. After that long-ago conflict in the first year of underground life, the residents of Leninskaya became the rightful owners of the shelter and the diesel engines, and no longer shared energy with Muscovites. In a short skirmish, like an ancient monster, the motor trolley froze, clad in armor and bristling with 2 machine guns and spikes. The sullen sentries followed the shuttles with haughty glances. Their cart floated past, and the lights of Leninskaya were already looming ahead. The alien station opened up suddenly, striking the eyes with the light of many lamps, blinding them. It seemed that there were no shadows at all here. Leninskaya was so well lit, and therefore seemed unusually spacious and pleasing to the eye. 2 halves of the vault, like a pair of menacing waves, furiously soared above the platform, as if threatening to collapse and sink the station. Amazing lamps, separated by black partitions, poured streams of light onto the platform. Looking at the station, the hunter unexpectedly thought that even an enemy can be admired. Having sat in his dungeon hospital, accustomed to his native 4 walls, Arcana now greedily studied the pictures that opened up to him. But the hunter was not allowed to enjoy the view for long. According to tradition, the caravan drivers unloaded some of their goods here. A few people stayed, while others went to the final station of the Nizhny Novgorod metro, Park Kulturi station. Here, on Leninskaya, the shuttle traders, as a rule, sold products from the farm, bargaining for medicines or household items in exchange, and went to Park Kulturi for tools and spare parts. The trolleys, having thrown off some of their cargo, rolled faster. The tubing began to flash again, and Arcana again drowned in his thoughts. There was no one to distract him. The verbose Nikolai remained at Leninskaya. Zareknaya, commonly called Zarya, floated past, with striped round columns and walls the color of water in the summer Volga. The cramped but still living station with its architectural design reminded that there was still a world up there. Their carriage, like a boat, glided along the blue waves that decorated the walls of Zareknaya, and again plunged into the depths of the tunnel. 10 minutes later they had passed Dvigatel Revolutsi, a dark and unsightly station inhabited by equally gloomy and colorless people. And the name had never inspired confidence in the hunter. Dvizhok was much simpler and more understandable. Here, as at Zarya, the station's vault was supported by columns, thick as elephant legs, eating up the space on the platform. Electricity was not spent so wastefully here, and therefore it seemed that a shadow lay over everything here. Lost in his thoughts, the hunter did not notice how they had approached Proletarskaya. Slightly lighter than its neighbors, but just as cliched and monotonous. Proletarka had once been the last station of the old Leninskaya community. Previously, the territory of the Avtozavodsky began behind it. Until 12 years ago, the factory workers and the Leninsky united to form the Avtozavodsky alliance. One could even say that one community swallowed another, swelling and becoming stronger. Since the terrible day itself, the Avtozavodskaya community grew and strengthened, and its appetites grew constantly. In the management top of the plant workers, there were many former employees of the FSB and other services involved in ensuring the security of the main enterprise of the city, GAZ. Someone dubbed the new mini-state of the subway the Avtozavod Alliance, although many avoided the pretentious word alliance, preferring to call their neighbors plant workers and the community simply the plant. Others, in the old-fashioned way, continued to call their neighbors Lenins. Here, next to Proletarskaya, there were many interesting things. From here, an underground passage led to the large shelter of the Teplubmenik plant, which became the center of the alliance after the unification of the communities. In the branch roads leading to the surface, to the above-ground depot, the plant workers set up a farm and warehouses. The latter, although inferior in many ways to its sister, on Burnakovskaya, could still partially satisfy the needs of alliance residents for vegetables. They were briefly detained at a checkpoint beyond Proletarskaya, but soon the trolleys rolled on. They passed Avtozavodskaya, paved with gray marble, and greeted by the cheerful cries of local kids. The station, where almost all the men were stalkers, flashed before their eyes and was left behind. They passed Komsomolskaya and Kirovskaya. After the splendor of Stolitsa and Leninskaya, these half-stations seemed boring and unattractive. Dull and monotonous, the clone stations did not arouse Arkady's interest. The hunter could not see beauty in the monotony of Soviet architecture. The simple design betraying either the lack of imagination of the designer or the lack of money in the city budget. There was very little left to the terminal. The Park of Culture was pleasing to the eye. A large, whitewashed vault with chandeliers, made up of many mushroom-shaped lamps, a polished floor made of massive green and gray tiles, cleanliness and order all around. The hunter remembered this station before the terrible day, and its residents had managed to preserve the Park of Culture in its original form. The engine snorted, and the trolley froze in anticipation of the return journey. The caravan drivers still had to unload the goods and engage in tedious bargaining. The hunter had personal matters to attend to. It would take 20 minutes to pop into the infirmary and pick up the medicine he needed from an old acquaintance. The local doctor Vyacheslav was selling Arkady an antibiotic that at least somehow helped the hunter fight his illness. The local guards, as a rule, would turn a blind eye to the stranger for a handful of bullets. All the way to the hospital, Arkady couldn't shake off a vague uneasiness. It seemed as if there was a new smell in the air, a breath of change, bad changes. The guard on duty at the entrance to the hospital turned out to be unfamiliar. Arkan tensed up, trying not to show his excitement, and stepped forward. "Hey, where are you going?" A broad-shouldered, pockmarked man in camouflage blocked Arkan's path. A rough face, as if eaten away by an unknown skin disease, slit eyes, an indifferent look, a rock of a man. "I need to see Ilyachev on business," Arkan reported, not taking his eyes off the guard. "Bad day, bro. Sorry." The guardian of peace grinned, baring his strong teeth. And who are you anyway? I don't recognize you. The hunter put his hand in his pocket and quietly jingled the cartridges. The guard's face became serious. Let's get out of here. The broad-shouldered man raised his voice, pushing Arcana. When the hunter had taken a few steps away, the guard, who had returned to his place, assumed an indifferent pose. The premonition of change had not deceived him. Now there was nothing left to do but return to the platform to his people. And the hunter, hanging his head, walked back. The doctor, a longtime acquaintance of his who lived in the Park of Culture, was the only one who could help the hunter in the fight against his illness. And now the last thread was broken. Arkady Ivanovich! Someone suddenly called out to the hunter. Arcana turned around. A young blonde man beckoned to him from around the corner. The hunter instantly recognized him as the doctor's son-in-law, although he had not seen him for almost 2 years. Arkady ducked around the corner and squeezed the guy's hand. Making sure that no one saw them, he quickly put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a small box. Without saying a word, he shoved it into Arcana's pocket. Take him, he whispered hurriedly. Dad is dying. I'm afraid he'll never recover. Arkady, who didn't understand anything, looked up at the man. The unpleasant news hit the hunter like the butt of an axe, stunning him and driving him into a stupor. What's happened? The heart, the guy explained sadly. He's been complaining for a long time. The interlocutor pointed his finger at the hunter's pocket. There's what you need there. Less than Dad promised, but no more. That's all. He asked for forgiveness. Excuse me, I have to go. We don't need to be seen here. A quiet, "Thank you," escaped the hunter's lips and hung in the air. The corridor emptied in the blink of an eye, as if there had been no benefactor. Arcana took out a box and slowly opened it. 3 ampules, a parting gift from a comrade, the last thanks for old debts. The friend granted the hunter a few days or weeks of peace, and at the same time condemned him to painful uncertainty afterwards. Arkady slipped out into the tunnel unnoticed, reached the platform noiselessly. Dark thoughts pounced on him like hungry fish on bait. There was still medicine, but how long would it last? 2 or 3 weeks, and then what? A forgotten feeling stirred in my soul. Its claws went deeper. It was fear. After the trades, all the caravanners gathered in a small dining room in one of the station's utility rooms. The shuttle traders were unhappy. The Alliance had once again raised prices for diesel parts. They dined in silence, saving all their emotions for home, so they could let them out there. Arkady once again noted to himself that the factory workers' cuisine was much worse than in the capital. Or maybe they just didn't spoil uninvited guests with culinary delights on purpose. Too much honor. The smells of food and cooking wandered around the cramped tavern. A group of tipsy men were joking in a distant corner, and loud laughter and individual remarks could be heard from there. Petrovich, should I walk you home, or are you going to hobble yourself? The big guy loudly asked the skinny old man sitting at the next table. While finishing his portion, Arcana glanced cautiously at his grandfather. Life had squeezed all the juices out of this once strong body. The dirty, patched jacket hung on the old man like a sack. Tousled, greasy hair, bushy eyebrows that went straight down to the corners of his eyes, and a stiff stubble on his cheeks that hadn't seen a razor for a long time. His face was furrowed with wrinkles in which old dirt had nested.
I'll hobble there myself. The old man shook his head and waved his hand. No need to drag me anywhere. I still have strength. Wow. I'll go to Nadya now. My instrument is still in good working order. The old man, who was already frankly floating, became bolder. The merry company burst into friendly laughter. Apparently, the old man served as a local amuse-bourgeois. The theme of going to Nadyuka was immediately picked up at the table, and one elderly man began to tell the story of his young and inexperienced comrade.
He tells me I don't know how to approach. The boy is modest, he's never groped a woman, and I tell him dim the light and give him a mug for courage. Here you have to be gentle, kind, family-like. It will go further by itself. The main thing is to start. You're a theoretician, but here we need practice, a huge fellow thundered loudly from the next table. Everyone around burst into laughter at their comrade's dirty joke.
Apparently, a group of stalkers were celebrating a successful raid here, washing down the goods they had obtained.
I don't agree about the beginning either,
Responded the tall man by the wall.
The end is also important here.
Well, who would argue?
Laughed the narrator.
Kostel, when are you going up now? We're meeting the day after tomorrow,
Responded the one called Crutch, sipping a cloudy liquid from a faceted glass.
I sense there's still something to profit from there.
Arkady turned his gaze to the old man. He had suddenly hung his head and shrunk. There was no longer that mischievous, drunken gleam in his eyes. Now despair was splashing there. They're all walking back and forth, the bastards.
The old man cursed.
Raising his head and looking at the low, dirty ceiling.
Highwaymen and paupers.
The old man spoke in a gurgling voice as if something was boiling in his throat. The men's words about going up had stirred up some wound in his soul.
Petrovich, that's enough already. Go home, Kostil said to his grandfather.
But the old man stubbornly shook his head and stared at the wall. The hunter noticed that moisture glistened in his grandfather's eyes. I feel sorry for the guy, came from the jokers at the table. I told him, it's none of your business. Don't stick your nose up there. They'll bite your head off. It's your own fault. Well, guys, get moving. You've been sitting around too long. It's time. Arkady put down his spoon, continuing to watch the old man. He suddenly sobbed. A single tear rolled down from his eye, hiding in a furrow of a deep wrinkle. The grandfather was hopelessly drunk. His eyes wandered senselessly, his dry lips parted, trying to say something, but something unintelligible came out. Beasts, the grandfather whispered, and rested his chin on his chest. The hunter noticed a little girl jump out from somewhere. Running up to the old man, she carefully touched his dry hand. Grandpa, let's go, the little girl asked quietly. Mom said you need to rest. The old man nodded, not looking at the little girl, and turned to the wall. Arkady understood that even when he was drunk, he didn't want the girl to see his tears. Grandpa, please, the girl gently patted the old man on the shoulder. Let's go. Right now, Varvara Sergeyevna, muttered the grandfather. Right now, my dear. I'm already on my way. But the old man was clearly in no condition to hobble home. The drunken mead had done its job. Arkady slipped out from behind the table and grabbed his grandfather. He raised a surprised look at the hunter. Let's go, father, suggested Arkady, supporting the old man. I'll see you out. Waving his hand and saying that he would come soon, Arkan slowly hobbled onto the platform with the old man. The girl was spinning around, trying to support the old man, but was mostly in the way. When the hunter dragged the drunken old man to the tent, he was all sweating. The old man sank heavily onto the wooden bench. He was crying. What's wrong with him? Arkan asked the girl. She looked down, became quiet, squeezing a battered doll in her hands. Arkan saw tears glistening in the little girl's eyes, too. Our dad died, the girl, whose name was probably Varya, quietly responded, raising her hand to the ceiling. Up there. He went there with the other guys and never came back. I miss him. Arkady hung his head. Now it became clear why the old man was crying there, in the dining room. He and that drunken old man shared the same grief, and now the hunter, like no one else, could understand the unfortunate old man. Mom told me that God took Dad to heaven, Varya said quietly. Why, Uncle? If we miss him so much and wait for him, will God return Dad to us?
Arkady did not know what to answer the girl, how to calm her down. What to do? Tell the bitter truth and inflict a serious wound on this little girl, or lie and preserve the child's faith. After all, he himself still hoped for a miracle. Did he have the right to take hope away from her? The girl herself relieved the hunter of the heavy burden of choice. She bowed her head slightly and suddenly changed the subject. "Uncle, is God good?" came a new question. Not prepared for such a sudden attack, Archon was momentarily at a loss. "Probably," he muttered uncertainly. "He's evil," the little girl said with conviction. "He took our daddy away from us and now he'll never give him back to us. Dad used to go up there. He told me that the sun shines there during the day and the stars at night. I thought that when I grew up, he'd take me up there with him. But now Dad's gone and—" "Varya," the girl was called out quietly. The hunter turned around. A woman with a sad face was standing by the tent. A greasy apron, helplessly hanging hands, a look full of sadness and fatigue. The grandfather leaned his hand on the bench and stood up with difficulty. He glanced at Arkady, and silently bowing his head in gratitude, trudged heavily toward the tent. "Everyone should have a dad," the girl said to the hunter and trotted after the old man. Arkady watched her go and exhaled heavily. It was time to go back. While the hunter was walking to his people, sad thoughts gnawed at him. Having himself felt the loss of a son, he could feel the grief of this trio. The mother and daughter had lost their father and breadwinner. It was as if a piece of their family had been broken off, and the poor woman still had to raise and care for the child. Raise. Is that word appropriate here? Is it possible to rise above these smoky vaults of the station? There, above, there is only horror and death. What will happen to them now? Nothing will happen. The hunter pulled himself up. It always happened, and everywhere, and this death was neither the first nor the last. They would drag on slowly. They would get over it and forget. The loss of a loved one is like a deep wound. At first it bleeds and hurts, and then it heals, leaving only a scar. That's how it will be here. I felt bad at heart. They drove back quickly. The hunter even dozed off, lulled by the monotonous clatter of the wheels. He dreamed of the village where he had visited his grandparents as a child. In the dream, the world above was alive and bright. The green grove rustled behind the vegetable garden, and the water in the river running behind the copse rustled with the coastal grass. And the summer sun shone in the bottomless blue sky, indecently bright and shameless. And there, in that world, there was no war. Arkady was pulled out of his slumber by the scolding of the sentries. The light of the tunnel lamp splashed into his face, sobering him up and instantly driving away the remnants of sleep. The clanking and rattling of weapons, diesel smoke, a powerful beam of a searchlight hitting his eyes. The romantic dream half-vision was instantly obscured by harsh reality. They were crossing the border. Evening was approaching, and the station clock showed 4:30. Arkady and technician found the commander of their future detachment in the training room. Denis Boguslavsky was teaching young fighters how to handle a machine gun. His hair was bleached by early gray. His face was stern and angular. His nose was aquiline. Denis, who had long been nicknamed Bogus, was no taller than Arkady, but you could immediately sense hidden strength and power in him. Bogus was only a couple of years younger than the hunter, but despite his age, the commander always kept himself in shape. Muscles bulged under the fabric of his jacket. His movements were precise and coordinated. Only deep wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes hinted at the fact that this was far from a young man. Arkady knew nothing about his past. He thought Denis was either a former military man or an employee of some special service. The devil knows. Bogus once moved to the capital from Gorkovskaya and was considered one of Bespalov's best fighters. Strict, executive, and responsible, he inspired respect and radiated power. You wanted to obey such a person unconditionally. The future stalkers of the capital, boys of 15 or 16, stood at attention in front of Bogus. On the worn tables in front of them rested battered machine guns. An old man in a faded and battered digital with captain's stars on his shoulder straps watched the educational process. Sitting on a rickety chair, he slowly sucked on a hand-rolled cigarette and glanced at the youth. The upbringing of the wolf cubs was Bogus's direct responsibility. Taking the kalash in his hands, Denise addressed the students in a low, hoarse voice. A weapon for a soldier is like a beloved girl.
You must look after it like a beautiful doll. Get that into your head. Let's repeat the lesson on disassembling a machine gun. Half a minute later, a disassembled machine gun was lying on the table in front of Denis. Arkady liked watching the commander. No unnecessary movements, everything was precise and accurate, like a well-oiled mechanism. Bogus quickly assembled the Kalashnikov and looked at the young fighters. Take care of your weapons. They are the most sacred things. A stalker without a weapon is like a wolf without fangs. Got it, fighters? The students nodded in unison. These guys were about to get acquainted with the surface after a couple of months of training and practice. Now do it yourself, ordered Bogus. And while the future stalkers rattled the machine gun parts, the commander squeezed Arkady and technicians' hands. He briefly told them to wait until the training was over and glanced at the nearest guy. His bolt was reluctant to come out of the bolt carrier. Bogus stepped towards the slow-moving student, placing his palms heavily on the table. Senin, how long are you going to masturbate? Why are your hands shaking? You have to take the machine gun confidently, like a woman. If you have to, you can undress a girl with her eyes closed in half a minute. And here you're picking around. Do it quickly, but don't rush. Haste is needed in other matters, and even then not always. The commander's words helped. Soon the Kalashnikov parts were neatly lying on the table in front of the guy. Bogus nodded approvingly. Well done. Now collect. After the assembly, the commander gave the students a series of push-ups. 1, 2, 1.5 in the corner of the room. Watching how after a couple of minutes the guys were puffing and sweating from the effort, Bogus began preaching to the future stalkers lying in a prone position. Is it hard? Do you think it will be easier at the top, in a chemical tank, and with gear? And what if you are going home from far away with swag? Breathe more evenly, and don't whine. And whoever is tired or misses their mother's tit, just tell me. Today you will get a kick in the ass and go to Burnakovka, to stick your ass up in the garden beds with women, or to knead shit in a pigsty. Got it? Yes, sir, the students responded in unison. No one was even thinking of whining. The captain, who had not said a word until now, chewed on his cigarette and blew out a cloud of acrid smoke. We should prescribe a drill for the eagles, croaked the old soldier, scraping the stubble on his cheek with his nails, so that everything would be sensible, so that it would be like we have it, the old-fashioned way. Yegorich, they need your drill like a grandfather needs a dick, Bogus grinned, stretching his neck. They run well without it. Just wait a bit. We'll soon march to the Park of Culture in a triumphant step. These eagles will still bring us victory in their beaks. We'll give the factory workers hell. Just give us time. The old man nodded approvingly. Bogus finally allowed the boys to rise from the floor and, looking at the line standing in front of him, commanded, "Lights out! Run to the station and back. Then to the barracks, get ready for dinner. Move your tights. After watching the students leave, Bogus took off his jacket and stretched his arms and neck. Then he hung on the horizontal bar in the corner of the room and began to throw his body up and down. Arcady heard footsteps behind him and turned around. Finally, the rest of the fighters of their future squad had arrived. Arkasha, hello. A tall, stooped man with a scar on his cheek and tired eyes extended his hand to the hunter. How are you? Haven't seen you for a long time. Hello, Yegor. Arcady responded to the handshake. Thank you. I think he's still alive. The hunter had known this man for a long time. Arcana had gone on campaigns with Yegor Lukachev, better known as Lukic, and he had long since established himself as an excellent stalker and comrade in arms. He never contradicted and always sensed when someone needed help. Not tolerating arguments and disagreements, he was always the first to take on any assignment or difficult task, which he carried out efficiently and silently. Lukic was also very well read, and you could talk to him about a lot. But Arcana had only seen the guy who arrived with Lukic before, but he had heard a lot about him. Grisha, better known at the station by the nickname Ice, casually squeezed the hunter's palm, giving him a short, indifferent glance. Technicians said that Grisha was one of Bogus's best students. Despite his bad character and willfulness, he obeyed Bogus unquestioningly. They had long found a common language with the commander, who took him on campaigns, training him like a hunter trains a pointer, and Grisha had never let the commander down. Strongly built, Ice spoke slightly arrogantly, stretching out his words and constantly frowning one eyebrow. How are you? The technician asked Grisha.
Ice!
He responded, smiling and showing yellow teeth.
Full of strength, ready to go up right now.
How are the young ones, Dennis? Lukic inquired, greeting Bogus. The commander pulled on his jacket and cracked his fingers. The young ones are getting stronger. The wolf cubs are growing fast. They'll soon become mature, the leader responded. They'll be a fine pack, a fighting one. We'll tear the factory guys' throats out. Oh well, that's all just poetry. Let's get down to business. So, let's set out at 5 in the morning. I don't think we need to be taught anything, we're not boys. Yegor, you're responsible for getting ready, according to the old plan. Now to the warehouse, then to the supply manager, then back here again. An hour later, when the Stalkers received canned food, crackers, spare chemicals with flashlights and other equipment, they gathered again in the training room. Bogus looked over the team meticulously, asked if everyone's personal chemicals were in good working order. Then the Stalkers equally distributed the load and laid it out in backpacks. Look at the gear carefully. I'll check it again tomorrow before we go out, Bogus said sternly. Well, that seems to be it. Time to rest. The day that seemed so long to the hunter finally ended. Today they did not go to their corners. They spent the night in the departure room, as the capital Stalkers like to call it. An ordinary small room with 2-tiered bunks and nightstands next to them. That's what the departure room looked like. Nothing extra. There was a place to throw things and rest before the hike yourself, and that was all that was required of it. Usually, Stalkers spent the night together before another sortie, having prepared everything in the evening, and in the morning they went upstairs. Sleeping in your apartment, or going home before a sortie, was considered a bad omen. Departure rooms taught discipline and composure. Often before the sorties, Stalkers did not sleep for a long time. They told stories, chatted about life, discussed the upcoming hike. But today, Bogus strictly ordered to rest. We'll chat later, said the commander, taking off his jacket and remaining in just a vest. And now, sleep. The journey is long, we need to rest properly. Grisha had long since climbed up to the second tier above Lukic, and even snoring was already coming from there. Yegor lay silently, looking at the planks of the bunks hanging over him. Then, he pulled up the blanket and, wishing everyone good night, turned to the wall.
Bogus climbed up to his place, looked at Arcana. Lights out, guys. Until the morning. Rest. The technician who had come from the restroom clicked the switch, and the departure plunged into darkness. The guy patted the hunter on the shoulder and climbed onto the second tier. Arcana half reclined for some time, propping his head up with his hand, and listened to the silence. Bogus was breathing noisily. The technician was fiddling around above his head, getting comfortable. Arcady suddenly realized that this day had exhausted him terribly. He carefully dropped his head onto the pillow, closed his eyelids, and instantly departed for the rest station. For some reason, Arcana felt like he was riding on a handcar. The iron cart was rocking. The rails were knocking under the wheels, counting down the last minutes of the passing day. And the hunter, exhausted by the day's bustle, fell deeper and deeper into slumber. He had a strange dream. A hunter was walking through the forest. He could smell rotting leaves and pine needles and distinguish the voices of some birds, and in all of this, there was a sense of mystery. Arkady again felt as if someone invisible was watching him closely. The hunter felt a piercing gaze directed at him on his back and tensed up. "Anton?" Arkady quietly addressed the invisible observer. No answer. Only the wind rustles in the trees and the eternal wandering clouds run in the heights about their business. "Anton." Arcana repeated his call, and again there was silence in response. The hunter only thought that the forest whispered barely audibly, "Go ahead. Go to him." And then Arcana ran. He rushed, not making out the road. Branches caught on the chemical plant, whipped at the rubber of his gas mask. Forward, forward. It seemed to him that there, around the bend in the path, there was something very important, something he was striving for. A familiar loud voice came from somewhere far away. The vision blurred and swam. "Rise!" End of the preview fragment. You can buy the full version of the novel on Leaders. https://www.leaders.ru/Sergei-Semenov/Metro 2033 Chuzhemy Glazami